Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere dustier, bloodier, and surprisingly full of sandals. It's 1096, and you're about to be thrown into one of the most overhyped, under-hygienic religious adventures in human history, the Crusades. Spoiler, you're not the hero. Before we saddle up for God and glory, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you're into dry history, darker truths, and bedtime stories laced with moral disillusionment. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and whether you'd last longer than 5 minutes in chainmail. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to drown out the imaginary screams of battle, and let's drift back to a time where your daily choices were sweat, starve, or get stabbed. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year of our Lord 1096. Or maybe it's 1097, no one really knows, including you. Calendars aren't standardised, dates are mostly suggestions, and your last concept of time was before I got on the boat that smelled like dead saints and regret. You're a crusader now, not a knight, not a hero, just a guy who got swept up in the ultimate mix of religious propaganda, peer pressure, and a fundamental misunderstanding of geography. You didn't join because you wanted to. You joined because everyone else in your village did. The local priest said it was a shortcut to heaven, and honestly, you were bored. The First Crusade. A noble mission, they said. A holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from the infidels, they said. What they didn't say is that infidels is a flexible term. Jerusalem is over 2,000 miles away, and you'd probably die somewhere in Hungary from diarrhea before you even make it to a battle. But hey, don't beat yourself up. You're one of tens of thousands who've been sold the same flaming bag of theological nonsense. The Pope said it was your duty. The nobles said it was your opportunity. The butcher down the road said he'd give you a free pig's foot if you signed up. That was enough. So here you are. Not quite a soldier, not quite a pilgrim, more like a confused, underfed meat puppet carrying a wooden cross and some very unrealistic expectations. You've left behind everything you knew, your family, your farm, your one decent pair of wool socks, for a cause you barely understand, endorsed by men who'll never set foot on the same road as you. Let's talk about your uniform. No shining armour, no dramatic cape. You're wearing a coarse tunic with a red cross badly stitched onto the chest. It's less of a military uniform and more of a please stab me first target. Your shoes are hand-me-downs from a guy who already lost both feet. Your weapon? A rusted sword that's seen more mould than battle. And you're not alone. You're marching with a ragged crowd of equally unqualified participants. Runaway serfs, overly excited monks, elderly peasants with chronic coughing disorders, teenage boys who thought this would be like the fairy tales, and one guy named Gerhardt who just really hates Turks, despite not knowing what a Turk actually is. No one knows where they're going. You follow the leaders because they have horses, and you assume that means they must have a plan. They don't. You're walking based on rumours, visions, and the medieval equivalent of a Yelp review written by a bishop who's never left his cathedral. Your name doesn't matter, and you've already been called 6 wrong things by 5 different people. If you're lucky, someone back home will remember you as the one with the weird left ear who went off to find Jesus and probably exploded. And let's not forget the paperwork. Oh wait, there isn't any. No dog tags, no ID, no way to prove who you are or where you came from. If you die, which you will, your legacy is a shallow grave and possibly a misspelled entry in someone's sermon 3 villages over. That if you're lucky enough to get buried and not just left to become a snack for the next passing army of rats. But here's the part that really sells it. You think you're special. You really do. You've been told this is your path to glory. That God himself will smile upon you. That your sins, all of them, will be wiped clean the moment your sandal hits holy soil. Spoiler alert, they won't. You've been on the road for weeks now. Or maybe months. Days blur when you haven't seen a clean latrine since the last lunar eclipse, and your feet look like boiled fruit. Time doesn't pass here. It limps. Slowly. With a limp that probably has gangrene. You expected banners flapping in the wind. Trumpets. Holy chants echoing from the mountaintops. Instead what you get is mud. Relentless mud. Not the cute kind that makes you nostalgic for childhood puddles. This mud is alive. It clings to you. Eats your shoes. Swallows the dead. One poor soul tripped and disappeared completely last week. You assume he's with God now. Or the mud. Hard to say which is more forgiving. The air smells like sweat, smoke, and the kind of despair that comes from realising you traded your family farm for the chance to die on a road no one will name. You try to breathe through your mouth, but then you remember the guy behind you has been vomiting pottage for 3 miles, and now it's baked into his beard. Speaking of beards, everyone has one. Even the women, you're pretty sure. There's no time for grooming, not when your campfire doubles as a crematorium, and your only mirror is a puddle filled with someone else's sins. Who's leading this divine train wreck? A man in polished armour named Count Something. He rides at the front on a majestic horse that drinks better water than you do. He hasn't walked once. His tent has actual furniture. His servants fan him with branches while you share your last dried turnip with a guy who once tried to bite you during a fever dream. The Count delivers speeches, glorious speeches. God wills it, he shouts, before disappearing into his tent for roasted ducks and a quick massage. You, meanwhile, are left chanting back, God wills it, because the man next to you is watching, and he still has that knife he found in a ditch. And you do believe, sort of, you have to, because if you don't, what's left? You gave up everything, your home, your body, possibly your soul. You hold on to faith like a splintered walking stick, sharp, fragile, but the only thing between you and complete emotional collapse. You were told the journey would be hard. You weren't told it would be a slow-motion exorcism through every level of hell. Pilgrimage, they said. More like a medieval group death spiral with hymn breaks. The people around you aren't soldiers. They're volunteers, which is just a nice way of saying untrained and terrified. You've seen men stab themselves in the foot to get out of marching. You've seen others pretend to be dead just to stay under a bush and not get yelled at. One guy tried to fake rabies. He barked for 2 hours. No one bought it, but honestly, respect. You pass through villages. Some welcome you. Most don't. You eat what you can, which is often nothing, and sleep wherever the lice allow. Sometimes on the ground, sometimes on your face. Your dreams? A swirling cocktail of hunger, divine guilt, and the recurring image of a wheel of cheese you haven't tasted in months. It taunts you. Your gear is falling apart. Your belt is frayed. Your knife is dull. Your cross, the sacred symbol pinned to your chest, is covered in grime, chicken feathers, and what might be someone's blood. You're not even sure anymore if it's a religious emblem or just a very unconvincing bib. And still, you march, because turning back isn't an option. Not just because you'd be branded a coward and possibly stoned with stale bread, though that's part of it. No, it's worse than that. You've come too far, suffered too much. You've convinced yourself it'll be worth it, even if part of you already knows it won't. And Jerusalem, that mythical city of gold and salvation, you don't even know what it looks like. You couldn't point to it on a map. Actually, you've never seen a map. You just know it's that way, vaguely southeastish, over mountains, seas, deserts, and several layers of mortal peril. It might as well be the moon. But you walk, because you're told that every step earns you favour in heaven, that your sins are peeling off like dead skin, replaced with holiness and blisters. Mostly blisters. The person you were before this, the farmer, the blacksmith, the guy who liked bread a little too much, is gone. Out here you're no one. A moving sack of sweat, prayers and minor infections. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't ask questions. You nod. You bow. You say amen, even when you don't know what was just said. You've started to forget your own language. Latin fills your ears, shouted by priests and nobles who insist it's holy even as they argue about who gets to keep which piece of loot from the last burned village. You try to listen, but your brain is mush. It's been days since you had a coherent thought. You miss thinking. You haven't written anything down. There's nothing to write with. If you die tomorrow, no one will know your story, no diary, no chronicle. Just the memory of someone who once shouted Deus Vult with enough conviction to almost believe it. And belief, that's the real battlefield. Because every time you pass a rotting corpse on the side of the road, you wonder if God really wanted this. If heaven truly requires this much foot fungus and hallucinated saints. If maybe, just maybe, someone got the message wrong. But questioning is dangerous. You keep your doubts quiet. You smile when the priest passes. You pray when told. You dip your fingers in holy water that smells suspiciously like stew. And you keep walking. Because the only thing worse than dying on the way to Jerusalem is living long enough to realise Jerusalem doesn't want you either. Somewhere along the 4th week, or is it the 5th month, you stop keeping track entirely. Not because you don't care, but because your body has begun treating time like it treats nutrition, with utter indifference. You're not sure where you are anymore. The banners still wave. The cross is still stitched to your chest. But whatever sense of self you carried into this pilgrimage has been slowly, thoroughly boiled out of you under a sun that feels more like divine punishment than natural weather. The heat hits differently here. It doesn't just warm you, it interrogates you. It melts your resolve and roasts your soul one layer at a time. And yet, you keep going, because you no longer feel like a person. You're a unit now, a walking apostrophe in someone else's gospel, an anonymous dot in an epic poem that no one will ever write, because everyone who knew how to write either died of dysentery or stayed home. You no longer have thoughts, just needs. Food, water, sleep, less chafing, fewer hallucinations. Maybe a moment of silence when no one is screaming, coughing, or arguing about the finer points of theological warfare while pooping into a ditch. Your name, which once felt like an anchor to identity, has been replaced with nicknames shouted across camps. Hey you, goat breath, limp guy, or crossface. You respond to all of them, because at this point, any form of recognition feels like a miracle. Sometimes people forget you altogether. Last week, your group left without you for 6 hours. You caught up eventually. No one noticed. Or cared. It's fine. You haven't bathed since the Rhine. At least you think it was the Rhine. It could have been a large puddle filled with horse urine and baptismal aspirations. Either way, you've been caked in a waxy paste of sweat, smoke, and moral compromise ever since. You itch constantly, but you're too tired to care. Your skin has become a full-time battlefield between the fleas, the lice, and what might be a fungus or might be divine punishment. Again, hard to say. You dream in fragments now. Not vivid stories, just blurred scenes. Your mother stirring stew, the sound of rain on the barn roof, the feel of warm bread in your hands. And then, always, the snap back to reality. Dry mouth, distant wailing, and a knight threatening to flog a boy who accidentally looked at a relic too long. And the relics. Oh, the relics. Every other noble claims to have a splinter from the true cross, a vial of Mary's tears, or the mummified toe of Saint Jerome. You once saw 2 rival bishops fight over whose finger bone belonged to John the Baptist. They both lost. You still have no idea who won, but you're not allowed to question. Questioning is heresy, and heresy is a one-way ticket to public execution. Or worse, mandatory confession with a very sweaty priest who thinks lice are a test from God. So, you nod along, you repeat the chants, you kiss the relics, even if they smell like goat and shame. You pretend that it all makes sense, even when it doesn't, especially when it doesn't. Every once in a while, someone tries to give a rousing speech. A friar, a knight, a wide-eyed lunatic with a bone staff. They stand on a barrel and shout about glory, about sin and redemption, about bathing the Holy Land in righteous blood. People cheer. You cheer too. It's easier than explaining that you don't even remember what the Holy Land looks like on the crude drawing your cousin made in dirt before you left. You remember that cousin. He stayed behind to marry the baker's daughter. You thought he was a coward. Now you think he's a genius. He's probably baking bread right now, sleeping in a bed, not defecating beside a burning log while a monk chants over a dead ox. But you're here. And now that you've marched this far, you start telling yourself the biggest lie of all, that this is your destiny. That this mud-caked, fever-drenched, blood-soaked journey is somehow exactly where you were meant to be. That God is watching and is maybe, just maybe, pleased with your constant state of near death. Except, is he? You wonder, late at night, when the camp is quiet except for the moaning and the wolves and that one guy who keeps arguing in his sleep. You wonder if God even asked for this, or if some men with pointy hats and political aspirations just used his name like a sword and pointed it at the east. You were promised a holy mission, but so far all you've done is walk, suffer, and occasionally commit deeply unholy acts in the name of righteousness. You watched your companions steal from villages. You saw a priest bless a sack of looted wine. You helped burn a town because the mayor said the wrong prayer too slowly. And still, you keep going. Because what else is there? If you go home, you'll be nothing. A quitter. A faithless wanderer. Assuming you make it back at all, which is doubtful. So you press on. You bury the doubts. You convince yourself that the harder it gets, the holier it must be. That maybe holiness just feels like heat stroke and remorse. You've stopped fearing death. Not because you're brave, but because it feels inevitable. Like a poorly dressed noble, It just shows up uninvited and ruins everything. You've seen men die from splinters, from bad soup, from drinking water that looked a little too sparkly. You've seen a man die laughing, possibly at the absurdity of it all, or maybe because his brain was melting. But here's the thing no one told you about the Crusades. You don't just lose your body, you lose yourself, your memory, your softness. The version of you that once paused to watch clouds or pet a dog or smile at your sister when she sang off key. That version doesn't survive this road. He's buried under calluses, infection, and the stale taste of sanctified rage. You haven't spoken to anyone about how you really feel in weeks, maybe months. You tried once, with a fellow marcher named Elias. Told him you were scared, that you missed home, that maybe you made a mistake. He looked at you, blinked, and said, "Same." Then he walked into a bush and didn't come back. You don't talk much now. Your thoughts stay folded up in the crusty blanket of your brain, where they keep company with half-formed prayers and the distant memory of clean fingernails. You've forgotten the taste of most foods, the names of your neighbours, the colour of your wife's eyes. You'd cry, but your body's too dry for tears. You've started to forget what you're even fighting for. Was it Jerusalem? Salvation? Penance? Or was it just something to do? You told yourself it was a calling. But now, in the endless days of marching and misery, it feels more like an accident. A slow-moving mistake wrapped in hymnals and heresy, dragging you further from anything resembling purpose. And yet you walk, not because you believe, not anymore, but because walking is easier than admitting you were wrong. At some point, you stop marching toward Jerusalem and start drifting toward abstraction. The road doesn't lead anywhere anymore, it just continues. You pass through landscapes so barren and unfamiliar that you start wondering if maybe you died back in Bavaria. And this is just the world's longest afterlife onboarding sequence. You step over skeletons. You pass makeshift crosses. You see a boot sticking out of a mound of dirt and you don't flinch. That's not someone's tragedy. That's just scenery now. You've become disturbingly good at ignoring suffering. Someone collapses beside you. You sidestep. Someone screams for water. You stare forward. Someone begs you to carry their things because they broke a rib coughing. You nod sympathetically and pretend not to understand the language. It's not cruelty, it's self-preservation. And you're terrible at both. What little sense of morality you started with has eroded like the calluses on your heels. Slowly, messily, and without ceremony. When you passed through a town last week, you watched as your fellow crusaders looted a bakery, then beat the baker for hiding his last loaf. He had children. You saw them. One of them cried. You turned your head just enough to look away, but not so far that you seemed suspicious. You told yourself they were pagans, or schismatics, or heretics, something bad. You're not sure. You can't pronounce the local dialect. You just repeat what the priest said and hope no one asks follow-up questions. Because if they're the enemy, then maybe you're still the good guy, right? Your prayers are shorter now. Not because you're losing faith, you tell yourself, but because you're so busy being holy in action that you don't have time for holy words. Also, your mouth is full of ulcers, and talking makes your teeth ache. You try to hum hymns sometimes, but the words slip through the cracks of your memory like water through your rotting boots. You don't talk to God much anymore. When you do, it's not really conversation, more like mental grimacing. A please don't let me die today here. A make the pus stop there. And when it doesn't stop, because it never does, you just shrug and keep walking. The men around you are changing too. Faces that once had light in them now look like discarded wax statues. Eyes sunken, teeth missing. Expressions frozen somewhere between devotion and gastrointestinal distress. You don't ask names anymore. You don't need to. Everyone's called brother or friend or that guy who keeps screaming at shadows. You used to be afraid of the enemy, the Saracens, the Turks, the distant, faceless opposition painted in sermons as heathens and devils. Now you realise the thing you fear most isn't the enemy at all. It's yourself, the version of you that's being carved out of suffering and silence, the version that's learned how to smile while looting, pray while stabbing, and fall asleep beside a pile of corpses without having a single dream. You've crossed borders, but you couldn't name them. You've entered territories that don't have maps, walked through forests that seem older than sin, and waded rivers that whisper in languages your ancestors probably forgot centuries ago. And still, you haven't reached the Holy Land. But that's okay apparently, because now, they say, every step toward it is holy. Even when it's over a pile of burning debris. Even when your foot lands on something that might be a finger. Especially then. The crusade is becoming something else. It's no longer a journey. It's an identity. It replaces everything. You're not a blacksmith, or a father, or a man named Hugo from the hills of Alsace. You are a crusader, that's all. And that means something. At least it's supposed to. Except, what it mostly means is that you're now disposable in a group of similarly disposed souls. One cog in a spiritual meat grinder, operated by generals with vague maps and priests who think constipation is a moral failing. You could disappear tomorrow, and the only person who might notice is the guy who's been borrowing your spoon. Do you remember when you left? That parade of sorts, if you could call it that. People lined the muddy roads of your village. Some cheered, some wept. Your mother cried quietly and handed you a dried apple. Your father just said, "Don't embarrass us," then went back to sharpening the ploughshare. You thought they'd be proud, that one day you'd return, taller, holier, draped in a cape made of divine approval, carrying relics and stories and a limp that meant something. You imagined your name etched into songs, whispered in reverence, carved into chapel walls by candlelight. Now, if you returned, they wouldn't recognize you. Not just because of the beard, or the smell, or the fact that you're technically wearing what used to be a tent, but because your face has changed. You've seen too much, heard too much, felt too little for too long. You laugh at things that shouldn't be funny. You cry when bread crumbles wrong. You were promised transformation. And to be fair, they delivered. Just not the kind you expected. Now you catch yourself speaking aloud to no one. Not praying, not exactly. More like narrating your own descent, so someone, somewhere, might hear it. We marched today, you mutter. Someone died. No one stopped. The bishop's mule ate my bread. You say it like you're documenting. Like it matters, but it doesn't. You've seen people get left behind for a twisted ankle. Seen others carried for days on a stretcher, made of 2 broken shields, only to be quietly dumped when the trail narrowed and the commander said, "We must not delay the Lord." You've eaten things that weren't food. Bark, bugs, a lizard once. You pretended it was penance. Then you pretended it was meat. Then you didn't pretend at all. You just chewed and stared into the distance. Once, a child joined the caravan, 11 years old, alone. Said God spoke to him in a dream and told him to go to Jerusalem. He made it 3 weeks. Then he disappeared. No one talks about it. You used to flinch at death. Now it's just another logistical problem. Where to put the body? Whether to bury it or use it to block a ditch? Who gets their boots? Whether it's rude to take their hat? And no, it's not. Nothing is rude anymore. Just inconvenient. And yet, beneath all this, there's some tiny part of you still hopes. Not loudly, not optimistically, but faintly. In the same way a dying ember might still glow under a pile of ash. You hope that maybe, when you finally see Jerusalem, it will all make sense, that a light will shine, that angels will sing, that someone, anyone, will hand you a cup of clean water and say, "You made it, it meant something." You try not to admit it, even to yourself, but that fantasy keeps you walking. That, and the knowledge that if you stop walking, someone will step over you and keep going. No funeral, no goodbye. Just a soft, huh, and a quick grab for your shoes. So you walk. You walk with open sores, cracked lips, and the growing realization that the person who began this journey no longer exists. He died quietly, somewhere near the Danube, replaced by this strange, trudging thing. Part man, part shell, part spiritual tax write-off. You're not a soldier. You're not a pilgrim. You're not even lost. You're what happens when belief is weaponized and then left out in the sun too long. And it's only morning. Welcome to your new home. Don't get excited. It's not really a home. It's more like a festering smear of canvas, fire smoke, and communal despair spread across a piece of land that very clearly wants you dead. You're in a Crusader camp now? That word, camp, sounds almost cosy, like songs by the fire, warm stew, and a shared sense of divine purpose. Nope. This is less summer camp, and more like a post-apocalyptic flea market where hope goes to ferment. The tents are sagging, the ground is permanently wet in a way no one can explain, and every breeze carries the scent of rotting onions and sanctified body odour. Let's talk lodging. If you're lucky, and by lucky we mean nobility adjacent, you've got a canvas tent, fraying at the seams and tilted like a drunk pilgrim built it, which he probably did. It's stuffed with straw that doubles as bedding and bedding that doubles as rodent housing. If you're unlucky, you're sleeping under a cart, or beside a dying horse, or just curled up in your cloak on the dirt like some holy armadillo waiting for divine euthanasia. There's no insulation, no privacy, no doors, no locks, no do not disturb signs. If someone wants to come into your tent, they do. If someone wants your boots, they take them. If someone wants your food, well, good luck, because food is more of a rumour than a resource. Rain, constant, mud, permanent. The kind of mud that doesn't dry, doesn't flake, doesn't brush off. It absorbs. Your feet sink into it like it's trying to claim them. You lost a sandal 3 days ago and you still haven't found it. You may have actually buried it in a makeshift latrine by accident, which would be poetic if it weren't so disgusting. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It's not just bad, it's complex. A dynamic, evolving bouquet of human sweat, spoiled rations, dung, unclear whether animal or human, and incense that some priest is still burning because he thinks it might hide the scent of mass gastrointestinal collapse. Spoiler, it doesn't. The incense just adds a sharp, floral afternote to the general aura of decomposition. Think holy garbage fire with a hint of cloves. You breathe it in. You have no choice. Your nose has adapted, or maybe just surrendered. You sometimes hallucinate smells that aren't there. Roast meat, clean linen, your wife's hair. But then someone farts next to you in their sleep, and you're snapped back to the present. A living olfactory crime scene. Let's talk sound. It's never quiet. Ever. There's no night in the way you remember it. There's just a slight dimming of the gloom, followed by 6 hours of grunts, hacking coughs, distant groaning, metal clanking, people yelling in languages that sound like prayers mixed with curses, and one guy, always one guy, snoring like a blessed warthog possessed by St. Flatulence himself. If you're near the horses, add whinnying, shuffling hooves, and the occasional horrifying wet noise that may or may not be childbirth or someone dying quietly into the mud. Hard to tell. If you're near the clergy, there's chanting. Always chanting, monotone, relentless, and somehow echoing even though there are no walls. You respect their devotion, truly, but at 3 a.m, after marching 20 miles on an empty stomach with a groin rash that now has its own personality, the last thing you want to hear is Gregorian droning about repentance. Now, bugs. You're not coexisting with them. You're hosting them. Your tunic? Infested. Your socks? Colonized. Your hair? A live-action educational exhibit on the breeding habits of lice. At this point, you're not a man in a camp. You're a portable buffet for nature's smallest, hungriest parasites. You scratch constantly. Your skin has become a battlefield of scabs, sores, and mysterious patches that you avoid touching because every time you do, something squishes. You've stopped asking if it's infected. If it's not oozing or glowing, you count it as a win. Then there are the rats. Oh yes, the rats. They're bold. They don't scurry, they saunter. They know you can't catch them, and even if you could, what would you do? Kill one and eat it? That's what happened last week. One guy cooked a rat, got 3 bites in before projectile vomiting into his own helmet. He still wears the helmet. No one asks questions. Even the dogs are giving up. You've seen war dogs. Those legendary beasts raised for combat and loyalty, whimpering under carts, eyeing the soup cauldron like they're considering jumping in just to end it all. You tried petting one for comfort, and it bit you. Fair. The ground is a mosaic of footprints, old fires, shattered pottery, and feces. So much feces. Human, animal, speculative. You try to avoid it, but your boots are so caked in it, at this point they've become diplomatic ambassadors for the concept of crap. You've stopped wiping your feet. You've stopped noticing. If the surface is vaguely dry, it counts as clean. Bathing? Hilarious. There's a stream nearby. Technically, it's a thin, green trickle of water that everyone bathes in, poops near, washes cuts in, and blesses holy objects beside. One guy drank from it. He hasn't blinked in 2 days. You rinse your face with water collected in a helmet once used for soup, and count that as a spa day. You haven't washed your clothes and honestly, you've lost track. They don't feel like fabric anymore. More like rigid sheets of sadness moulded to your body. Your tunic can stand upright when you take it off. Your cloak? It now has a smell so distinct, you're pretty sure it has evolved sentience. You talk to it sometimes. It's a better listener than most of the men. Your bedding is straw, or moss, or something that used to be straw, but now mostly resembles mildew and shame. It crunches when you lie down, and not in a good way. You sleep curled around your pack like a cold-blooded lizard, one eye open for thieves, rats, or aggressive hallucinations. You dream of chairs, not thrones, not riches, just chairs, with backs, and maybe a cushion. Once, in a fever, you hallucinated a bench and wept openly until someone shook you and told you it was a sleeping goat. Fire is rare, wood is scarce, and everything is damp. You huddle near smoky pits where someone's burning dung just to stay warm. The smoke stings your eyes, but you pretend it's just spiritual weeping. Everyone else does too. And then there's the wind, not a cool breeze, not a gentle whisper of air to dry your tunic of despair. No, the wind in Crusader camp is a weapon. It picks up at night, carries the full scent profile of death, onions and regret, and deposits it right in your nostrils. It flaps your tent open just when you're trying to sleep, blows ashes into your stew, and occasionally lifts your cloak like a divine prank. You tried to pin it down once. The wind laughed. You heard it. You've stopped trying to make camp better. You don't rearrange your gear anymore. You don't sweep the ground. You just lie there, a holy lump, waiting. Sometimes, when the camp goes quiet for a rare moment, you can hear the crackling of a distant fire, the soft sobbing of a boy pretending to pray, or the low murmur of a priest reminding himself why this is all worth it. And you close your eyes. You breathe through your mouth. You try not to think about how much worse it will be tomorrow. And that's the environment, not majestic, not sacred, not cinematic. Just a wet, stinking, buzzing, biting, moaning reminder that the road to heaven is apparently paved with feces and failure. Welcome home. So, you've survived another night in the camp. Congratulations. That means you weren't trampled by a horse, suffocated by your own lice blanket, or mistaken for a demon by a half-blind priest with a mace and a tendency to act first and confess later. But now, it's morning. You'd think that means a sunrise, birdsong, maybe a dewy meadow. No, it means a trumpet blast that feels like it was invented by Satan for exactly this purpose, followed by someone kicking your side and shouting something in a mix of Latin and phlegm. Wake up, Crusader. It's time to march. Your knees crack. Your spine makes a noise that sounds legally actionable. You stretch, instantly regret it, and peel yourself off the ground like a regret-flavoured fruit roll-up. Everything hurts. Joints, muscles, emotions. Your neck is sunburned. Your toes are swollen. Your left ear is possibly hosting something sentient. You're not fed. There's no breakfast. Just dry bread that tastes like despair mixed with ashes, and maybe the corner of someone else's ration. You chew it anyway, slowly, eyes dead, while watching a knight pour wine on his feet to kill foot demons. You hoist your pack. It groans. You groan. Your back, knees, and ankles hold a small meeting and vote unanimously against continuing. Too bad. You march anyway. And the terrain? Let's talk terrain. The idea of roads is theoretical. You're walking on whatever ground happens to exist between where you are and where you think Jerusalem might be. That includes hills, rocks, thorns, sinkholes, forests that hate you personally, and paths so narrow you have to walk sideways with your pack dragging through brambles like a sad, itchy parade float. And mud. Always mud. Sometimes thick, sticky swamp mud that tries to suck the boots off your feet. Sometimes deceptive, crusty surface mud that cracks open like a trap when you step on it, dropping you knee-deep into something that smells like a pig's opinion. Occasionally, dry ground gives you hope. That's a mistake. Dry ground means dust. Not ordinary dust, weaponized dust, fine, blinding. Everywhere dust that coats your teeth, clogs your nose, and turns your skin the colour of roasted apathy. You sneeze and create sandstorms. Clothing makes it worse. Your tunic traps sweat. Your cloak traps heat. Your undergarments, assuming you're still wearing any, have fused with your body like a wool-based infection. There's no dressing for the weather. There's just existing inside a damp, medieval Tupperware. And then there's the sun. The sun is not your friend. It's not even neutral. It is a flaming, hateful eyeball in the sky, watching you suffer and occasionally pressing down harder just to remind you who's in charge. There's no shade. Trees are rare. And if you try to rest under one, a priest might shout at you for sloth, or a wasp might declare war on your face. You sweat constantly, through your shirt, through your cloak, through emotions you didn't know had sweat glands. You can feel your inner organs warming like badly refrigerated cheese. You try to ration water, but it's either tepid, polluted, or mysteriously chunky. And yes, water matters, not just for drinking, but for not dying. You can go a few days without food, but try marching in full sun with a 30-pound pack, chafing thighs, and no hydration, and you'll start to see angels. Not real ones, hallucinated ones. And they're judging you. One guy tried to drink from a stagnant pond. He said he didn't care if it killed him. It didn't. But he did throw up for 5 straight hours, then claimed he saw St. Peter riding a donkey made of glass. That same guy now talks to trees. He's our scout. Weather, by the way, is not seasonal. It's spiteful. If it's not sun, it's rain. Not gentle rain. Not cinematic drizzle. Cold, heavy, aggressive rain that soaks you through, even under your cloak, even inside your tent, even when you're actively screaming at the sky to stop. Your clothes go from damp to soaked to something best described as medieval pudding. And when it's not raining or burning, it's windy. Wind that blows sand into your eyes, prayers out of your mouth, and once took a bishop's hat so far into the distance no one's seen it since. He cried. You weren't sure if it was from grief or dust. When the weather doesn't want to kill you, the terrain does. Slopes so steep you climb them on all fours. Valleys so deep you wonder if anyone's ever come out the other side. Rivers that look safe until you step in and immediately lose a sandal, your dignity, and any chance of clean undergarments for the next month. Bridges? Forget it. You cross by wading, swimming, or using a log someone tied rope to and called a miracle. You've seen more Crusaders fall into rivers than you've seen actual enemies. Drowning is basically a promotion. And then there's the march in itself. Hours, days, miles upon miles with no markers, no maps, and no sense of progress. Just forward motion. Your feet blistered, your legs cramping. Your pack chafing a groove into your spine that feels permanent. You don't talk much anymore. Not because there's nothing to say, but because every breath you save is one more drop of moisture your body won't lose to the endless furnace of the Crusader path. Some men sing. They shouldn't. They try to keep morale high with hymns or chants or crude jokes about local women they'll never meet. Mostly it's muttering, grumbling, and the occasional sobbing from someone who just remembered they left their only spoon behind in France. You pass bodies. Always. On the side of the road. Under trees. Sometimes buried. Sometimes not. Sometimes half buried. With a hand reaching out like it changed its mind halfway through. You don't flinch anymore. You just note the gear. Is anything salvageable? Maybe that boot will fit. Maybe they had bread. You saw a man bury his brother last week. Took him 2 hours to dig the hole. Said a prayer, cried, then used the same shovel to threaten another man who tried to steal his wine. You respected that. And all the while, the land around you changes. Slowly. From forests to scrubland to dry rock to shimmering nothing. And still no sign of Jerusalem. No sign of anything. Just more walking. More sweating. More dirt pressed into your skin until your skin and the land feel like the same thing. You've become scenery. You and the road are indistinguishable now. Both battered, dry, and going nowhere meaningful in a straight line. At this point, you no longer look at the horizon with hope. You look at it with dread. Because whatever's over that ridge isn't salvation. It's just more of the same. Or worse. The Crusades don't reward progress. They punish it. Movement is just a prelude to suffering. And even when you stop, when camp is set, when your legs give out and your body collapses in on itself like a dying star, you know it's only temporary. Because tomorrow, it starts again. You'll wake up in filth, march through dust, and end your day under a sky that refuses to acknowledge your prayers. That's the environment. It doesn't want you to win. It wants you to endure. Until you can't. Eventually, the landscape stops being a place and becomes a punishment. It's not that you're in a desert or a valley or a swamp anymore. It's that you've entered a mood, a spiritual texture, a biome designed by someone who once lost a board game and swore eternal revenge on all human feet. The ground is cracked and hot and full of jagged surprises. The plants hate you. Not metaphorically, literally. The shrubs here have thorns designed like tiny harpoons. You brushed against one and it pulled blood. Another pierced your boot and left your toe looking like an angry fig. You learned not to touch things. Even the grass is sharp. Even the shade has opinions. And just when you think, it can't get worse, nature leans in and whispers, "Try me." Take, for example, the flies. Flies don't buzz in the Crusader world. They swarm, in great clouds, with purpose. They know things. They seek wounds with the precision of divine punishment. They're in your ears, your nose, your eyes. One flew into your mouth once and you didn't even react. You just swallowed and moved on. The other Crusaders watched, nodded solemnly, and kept walking. You're not above the flies. You're part of their food chain. Then come the fleas. They live in your bedding, your hair, your seams. They bite indiscriminately and travel well. You've given up scratching. You just accept that at any given moment, a dozen insects are feeding on you like you're a cursed buffet of skin and sin. Sometimes you wake up with bite marks that form words. You suspect they're spelling out insults. And don't forget the mosquitoes. Not just your average whiny little backyard pests. These are medieval mosquitoes. Bigger, hungrier, possibly affiliated with Satan. You've seen them drink through 2 layers of wool and still look unsatisfied. One landed on a knight's face and left with half his cheek. He says he's fine. He's not. Rats are everywhere. Under carts, in sacks, on sleeping men's faces. They eat whatever they can. Old bread, candle wax, fingers if you're still long enough. You've tried to chase them off. They chase back. One dragged a boot into the shadows and now wears it. You call him Sir Whiskers. He outranks you. Even the birds are hostile. You saw a hawk swoop down, steal a sausage, and vomit it back up in midair, possibly out of protest. The crows follow your march like tiny feathered debt collectors. They know a feast is coming. They're just waiting for you to drop. Then there are the dogs, not loyal companions. not brave battlefield mascots. Just skeletal, limping beasts with haunted eyes, and ribs you could count by moonlight. You tried to pet one once. It growled, licked your bloodied hand, and walked into a river. You think about him sometimes. And then... the camels. Oh yes. If you're in the east now, you've seen them. The so-called ships of the desert. Majestic creatures in paintings. In person, they smell like hot regret, spit with surgical accuracy, and stare at you like they've seen your darkest sin and found it unoriginal. One kicked your friend in the stomach. He hasn't spoken since. But the animals aren't the only ones plotting your demise. There's the ground itself. Potholes that swallow ankles. Roots that lunge out of the dirt like snakes. Stones so sharp they cut through leather. You once tripped over nothing, landed on a pile of something, and emerged with 6 new bruises and an emotional crisis. The road isn't a road, it's an audition for martyrdom. And let's talk about tents again. You've moved 3 times in the last week, each time to a spot more cursed than the last. Your current location is slightly downhill from the latrine zone, which means that when it rains, and it will rain, you get a personalised delivery of everyone's spiritual and gastrointestinal output. You call it the river of unconfessed sins. Inside your tent, it's wet even when it's dry. Your bedding is either damp from sweat or damp from condensation. You're not sure which is worse. You've tried to air it out, but there's no such thing as fresh air here. Just variations of damp, sour, and did someone die nearby? Sometimes someone has died nearby. You find out when your neighbour stops snoring and starts attracting flies. You tell the nearest officer. They tell you to drag the body somewhere uphill. You do? You try not to look in the eyes. You fail. Disease moves fast here. Faster than horses. Faster than rumours. You see it in the spots, the coughs, the strange walks that start looking like limps and end looking like collapses. You're not a doctor. There are no doctors. But you can tell when someone's about to die. It's the smell, the eyes, the way they stare at their hands like they're trying to memorise their own fingerprints. You don't help anymore. You used to. But the last time you gave someone water, they coughed blood on your face and died mid-apology. Now you just nod and say, "Peace be with you," and walk away. You tell yourself it's mercy. And food? Not part of the environment. It's a dream, a rumour, a test. Most days, it's some hard bread, maybe a piece of dried meat that looks like it was aged in a boot, or a soup made from onions, bone water, and bitter herbs no one can name. You chew slowly, not because you're savouring it, but because chewing is exhausting, and your jaw clicks ominously. You've seen men try to eat grass. One tried boiling bark. A group once roasted a leather saddle. It tasted like despair and horse sweat. They ate it anyway. And through it all, through the bugs, the animals, the terrain, the decay, you're supposed to be grateful. Because this is the holy war. This is the path to heaven. This is cleansing through suffering. And maybe it is. Maybe God is watching. Maybe he sees you kneeling beside your mouldy blanket, coughing quietly into the dirt, and says, "That one gets an extra cloud." Or maybe, just maybe, this is hell. But you don't say that out loud. Not even when it's quiet. Not even when the stars come out. Sharp, indifferent pinpricks in a sky that refuses to weep for you. You lie there, surrounded by the environment in all its hostile glory, wrapped in your own filth, pressed between a dying world and a distant promise, and you wait for sleep, or death, whichever comes first. Let's talk about the latrine situation. Technically there is one. Sort of. It's a pit. That's it. A pit. Dug with whatever tool happened to be nearby, which may have been a shovel, or may have been someone's bare hands and a deeply buried grudge against dignity. There's no seat, no cover, no privacy. Just a hole in the earth, surrounded by flies, shame, and the whispered regrets of everyone who came before you. If you're lucky, it's downhill from your tent. If you're unlucky, and you are, it's upwind and just close enough to hear every blessed splash and grunt from your fellow holy warriors. You once tried to go at night, tripped on a root, fell in. No one helped. The priest gave you a sympathetic look and said it was probably penance. To wipe, there's nothing. You might find a leaf, a rag, your own cloak corner, in a moment of desperation. Or you just don't. Hygiene, after all, is a luxury for people not currently living inside a 24-hour panic dream, which brings us naturally to sleep. You don't sleep. Not really. You close your eyes and pretend not to exist for a few hours, while your body throbs gently and your brain replays every uncomfortable moment of the day like a cursed prayer wheel. You hear every sound, every cough, every footstep, every whispered, "What was that?" as someone investigates a noise that's definitely not an animal, and almost definitely a problem. You dream, if you dream at all, of falling. Off cliffs, into pits, through holes in your own spiritual foundation. Once you dreamed of bread. You woke up crying. Sleep comes in strange pieces. 20 minutes here, maybe an hour if your neighbour isn't screaming from night terrors or vomiting into his boots. You've begun to envy the dead for their consistency. And your body? Oh, it's no longer yours. It belongs to the campaign now. A sagging meat puppet dragged through dust and disease for purposes even it doesn't understand. Your muscles ache constantly. Your joints click and grind like a haunted windmill. You've developed new kinds of pain, invented them. Names don't exist for what your spine is doing. Your feet are blistered and cracked. Your nails are turning odd colours. Your ankles swell like they're trying to escape. You've seen men lose toes without realising it. One guy pulled off a boot and half his foot came with it. He laughed, then he cried. Then he drank a flask of wine that definitely wasn't his and passed out in a ditch. You stepped over him on your way to the soup tent. No one commented. Your hands, once useful, once yours, are swollen, scraped, raw. Blisters pop, heal wrong, crack open again. You've wrapped them in cloth, in rags, in hope. Nothing helps. The calluses are so thick they feel like armour. Useless armour. The kind that hurts you just as much as it protects. And your eyes. They sting constantly. From smoke, from dust, from staring too long at nothing. You squint even at clouds. You cry sometimes, just to wash them. And your ears, constantly ringing from bells, shouting, and the low, humming tinnitus of moral fatigue. Even your mouth is turning against you. Your tongue is cracked. Your teeth ache. Your lips split if you smile too wide. Not that there's much risk of that anymore. You suck on pebbles to make saliva. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it just makes you gag. One guy sucked on an old coin for 3 days before realising it was cursed. Or maybe he was just hallucinating again. It's hard to tell when you've got 6 fevers stacked on top of each other, like poorly filed syntaxes. And your skin. Oh, your skin. Let's talk about it. It no longer feels like a part of you. It itches. It flakes. It bleeds from no obvious source. Some patches are peeling. Others are hard like bark. You found a weird mole. It may be growing. You asked a monk if it looked infected. He made the sign of the cross and walked away. You've given up trying to feel clean. Clean is a concept for other people, for nobles, for merchants, for people with basins and water and choices. You are a crusader. That means your scent can be weaponized. Birds avoid you. Dogs bark at you. Children stare. One local villager threw a potato at you and said, "Unholy ghost! It hit your helmet. You kept the potato." Even the weather seems to have turned against your flesh. Sunburns blister in places you didn't know could burn. Rain soaks through your clothes and into your soul. Wind dries your lips into cracking maps of regret. You've started using mud as sunscreen. You call it a dirt blessing. The priest said nothing. He was doing it too. And yes, you still march. Every day. Across lands that weren't made for walking. Up hills so steep you lose comrades to gravity. Through valleys so hot your shadow gives up halfway. Across bridges that creak like they're built from bones and prayers. Over deserts that stretch longer than your faith. Sometimes you pass through villages. The people don't cheer. They hide, lock doors, clutch their children. They know what's coming. Crusaders aren't saviours. You're the storm that ruins the harvest. You eat their bread, take their water, use their churches as barracks. They pray for you to pass quickly. You pray to make it through without collapsing in their pig pen, but most of the time there's nothing, just dust. Silence. Ghost trees and scorched grass. Roads that lead nowhere and back again. You start counting steps. You lose count. You start over. The rhythm becomes your only prayer. And still you go on. Not because you believe in the cause, though maybe you do. Or maybe you just believe in not dying here. Or not dying without meaning. Or not dying for free. Or maybe you don't believe in anything anymore, and you're just moving because stopping feels too much like a decision. You begin to blur with the land. Your face is cracked earth. Your clothes are leaves. Your breath is wind and dust. You're not a pilgrim or a soldier or even a person anymore. You are weathered wood, ancient rope, a cautionary tale being written one blister at a time. And when someone asks you where you're from, you no longer answer with a place. You say there, and point back down the road. Not because it matters, but because it's all you have. The environment has absorbed you, claimed you, stamped its signature into your bones. You are Crusader, yes. But more than that, you are part of this campaign trail now. Not a traveller on it, a feature of it. And one day, when you finally collapse, there will be no monument, just more dust, more mud, more shifting wind and sour heat. The earth will roll over you like it's seen 1,000 before, and expects 1,000 more. And the next man will march past, eyes dull, feet blistered, and whisper, "Poor bastard." Then step over you because the road doesn't stop, and neither does the crusade. Let's talk about what you actually do all day, because no one tells you this before you leave. No one sits you down and says, "Hey, you won't be fighting glorious battles or reclaiming sacred relics. You'll mostly be moving rocks, carrying buckets, chopping wood, digging holes, then filling those holes back in because someone told you they were cursed. This isn't a holy war. It's a poorly managed construction site staffed by malnourished lunatics in matching cloaks. Every day begins the same, with a sound that isn't quite a trumpet and isn't quite a scream, but definitely ruins your morning either way. You open your eyes to pain. That's your alarm clock now. A full body, ground level complaint delivered by your bones before your brain has even started buffering. No breakfast. Just something beige and chewy, handed to you by a man who looks like he died last week, but is still legally obligated to serve gruel. You eat it. Not because you want to, because not eating means you pass out during the morning labour assignment, and passing out means becoming the labour assignment. Today's job, dig a trench. Why? Doesn't matter. Is it for defence? For water drainage? A symbolic gesture to show your commitment to the Lord? No one knows. The order came down from someone on a horse, and now you and 6 other guys are ankle deep in a line of dirt, trying to look busy enough not to get reassigned. The tools are bad, the shovels are bent, the pickaxes splinter on impact. You use a bucket that once held soup, a stick someone sharpened out of boredom, and a spoon that was clearly stolen from a monastery. Your hands are blistered, your arms ache. Your sweat is doing more digging than you are. The dirt fights back. It's not just soil, it's a mix of sand, clay, broken pottery, angry roots, and possibly bones. One guy found a skull yesterday. He screamed. Then he claimed it was a sign and now carries it around in a sack like a divine paperweight. You're not allowed to stop. If you stop, someone yells. Sometimes it's a sergeant. Sometimes it's a priest. Sometimes it's just a guy who likes yelling. Either way, you pick up the pace, even though every motion sends a polite electric fire up your spine and down into your legs. And you're hungry. Always. Not in a poetic, noble way. In a dull, distracting, wolf-like way that makes you eye tree bark like it's a snack. You dream of fat, of butter, of anything that doesn't crunch because it's stale or wriggle because it's not. Lunch is a joke. A hard roll and a ladle of something too thin to be stew, but too thick to be water. You chew it with the same teeth you used to pray with, and halfway through you find a twig. Or is it a bone? Either way, it's not yours. Back to work. Now it's hauling rocks. From where doesn't matter. To where still doesn't matter. The point is that you carry heavy things while people yell theology at you and remind you that salvation is only for those who lift with their knees. Your back is a battlefield. Your shoulders ache with a righteous vengeance. You've learned how to stagger instead of walk. How to lean your body just enough to make it look like effort without triggering your final catastrophic muscle cramp. You're sweating so much, your tunic is transparent. It clings like guilt. Your belt keeps slipping. You tied it tighter, but now it's cutting off circulation to your internal organs. You once had a liver. You assume it's still in there. Somewhere. Floating. The sun watches you. Not like a parent or a friend, like a cruel audience. It judges your every motion. It sees you pause to catch your breath, and immediately sends a fly into your eye. You can't win. You can't rest. You can only continue. Water is rare. You get a ladle when someone remembers. Usually warm, often shared, occasionally suspiciously yellow. But you drink it because thirst is worse than caution. And if your stomach explodes later, that's a problem for future you. You've been stung by insects, cut by your own tools, slapped by a rope, kicked by a mule, punched by a man who claimed your shadow was mocking him. You've sprained something, maybe everything? Your right knee sounds like a small drum every time you crouch. The left one no longer bends, and now it's time to build a palisade. What's that? A fancy name for wooden spikes badly hammered into the ground using rocks and curses. You're given logs, you're given a mallet, you're given 0 instructions. You begin pounding. It doesn't work. You pound harder. It still doesn't work. Eventually you just dig a hole, drop the log in, and smear some dirt around it like you're frosting a cursed cake. Someone inspects your work. They frown. You're reassigned. Now it's watch duty. Sounds easy, right? Standing around. Wrong. Watching means standing still for 6 hours in armour that smells like fermented goat sweat while holding a weapon that was last sharpened in 1083. You don't move. You don't sit. You don't blink too long, or they'll accuse you of sleeping, which is a flogging offence unless you're noble, in which case it's resting one's divine eyes. You stare into the distance, at nothing, at dust, at vague hills. You pretend to see movement. You don't. You imagine enemies. You imagine wolves. You imagine laying down and letting gravity pull you into the soil like a seed of disappointment. When the shift ends, your legs don't work. You sit, but your body stays vertical. You lie down, but your brain is still standing. You dream of swinging a sword, but your arms are too tired to lift anything heavier than guilt. You thought there'd be glory. Instead there's tasks. Endless, pointless, thankless tasks. Dig here. Move that. Stack those. Carry him. Burn this. Guard that. Cook. Stir. Serve. Pour. Clean. Scrape. Haul. Bleed. Some days it's scavenging. You and a few others are sent to find supplies, which is code for wander into a field and see if you can steal onions without being shot. You bring back weeds. You lie and say it's an herb. The cook doesn't care. Into the pot it goes. Other days it's weapon repair. You're given tools that look like they've been pulled from a fire and told to fix that blade. You scrape. You file. You pretend. When it breaks later in battle, the knight will blame you. You will nod. You will apologise. You will bleed anyway. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get called to help with the siege works. This is the special kind of labour reserved for men who don't cry anymore. You haul trees. You lash wheels together. You stack stones into towers that collapse when the wind sneezes. You build ladders so tall they start to curve from despair. You push carts of boiling pitch that occasionally boil you instead. The engineers, they shout at you all day in Latin. You don't understand. You don't need to. The tone says everything. Move faster. Lift harder. Stack straighter. Don't die yet. But people do. Crushed under wood. Buried in collapsed earthworks. Burned by their own fires. You dig them out. Or don't. Sometimes it's easier to build over them. One guy said he'd want to be part of this. You're not sure who he meant. And all the while you keep telling yourself this is holy. That work is worship. That carrying logs for 17 hours with a hernia is, in fact, just another step on the staircase to heaven. But in your heart, you know the truth. You didn't come here to labour. You came to matter. And now you're a wheelbarrow with feelings. You used to think work had an arc, a beginning, a middle and an end. You'd toil, sweat, curse, finish, and then bask in that brief shimmer of accomplishment before moving on to the next thing. Not here. In the Crusades, labour doesn't arc, it loops. You begin again before you've even stopped. You fix a wall, it collapses. You carry supplies, they disappear. You dig a trench, it floods. You build a siege tower. Someone accidentally sets it on fire before it's even upright. You fetch water, spill half of it, and are sent back without comment. This isn't progress. This is penance on repeat. And you're always tired, not just physically, though yes, every part of your body now radiates a dull, stinging fatigue, like it's broadcasting a distress signal, but mentally too, existentially. You're not just tired of marching or digging or stacking, you're tired of doing. Because none of it leads anywhere. No matter how hard you work, there's always more. The camp is never built, The defences are never finished. The roads are always broken. The wagons are always stuck. The priests are always yelling for someone to lift something in God's name, and it's always you. And resting? Please. Rest is a myth. A tale they told you back home. When the work is done, they said, you'll eat and rest in the Lord. But the work is never done. And the Lord, as it turns out, doesn't hand out pillows. He hands out more rope. You sit down, someone sees you. We need more men on the latrines. Help reinforce the fence. Boil water. Carry Brother Ulrich's relics. He's having a vision and can't lift them himself. You pretend not to hear. Doesn't matter. You're already being pulled up by the elbow by a man who believes that your spine is more durable than it actually is, and that holiness is measured in barrels lifted per hour. So up you go. And now you're lifting crates, or sacks, or baskets full of something. You don't even ask anymore. Could be flour, could be dirt, could be goat skulls. It all weighs the same. Too much. Your back bends, your arms shake, your legs wobble. You carry one load to the other side of camp. You drop it. You breathe. You turn around. Someone points at a different load. Take that one next. You want to say no. You want to lie down and let the ground claim you. But no one else is stopping. And there's something about collective exhaustion that makes rebellion feel rude. So you lift again. The pain is now background noise. It hums just below your awareness, like a choir of tiny demons pinching your nerves in harmony. You ignore it. You have to. Because if you really paid attention to every ache, every strain, every protest from your bones and muscles, you'd start screaming. And once you start, you're not sure you'd stop. You pass the time by counting. Not steps, not crates, just numbers, abstract. 1, 2, 3. You don't know what they mean. But counting feels like a task you control. It's your own little job inside the bigger, terrible job, and it helps, until someone interrupts. Lift that, move this, dig here. So you stop counting. Now you're digging again, not the same trench. A new one, different hole, same futility. The soil here is different. Rockier, full of roots, full of bugs. You break the shovel. You keep digging with your hands. Someone tells you to be faster. You nod. Then slow down slightly out of spite. It's the only rebellion you have left. And all around you, men are working the same way. Hollow-eyed, slack-jawed, bodies moving from pure habit. They don't speak unless it's to curse or cough. You used to joke with them. Now you just breathe near each other. Occasionally someone sings. It's awful. You don't tell them to stop, because at least it proves their lungs still work. Sometimes you're sent to help the cook. You chop onions. You skin something unidentifiable. You stir a pot so enormous it could hold your entire body, which you've considered, briefly, as an escape plan. The heat is overwhelming. The fire spits. The smoke clogs your nose. You stir anyway, because not stirring means the bottom burns. And if the bottom burns, everyone complains. And if everyone complains, you get blamed. Even the simple jobs are cursed. You sharpen a blade, it bends, you fix a wheel, it breaks again, you fetch firewood, you're told it's the wrong kind. You collect water, you spill half of it, and now you have to refill the barrel. You have become your own worst co-worker, and the hierarchy doesn't help. The knights don't work, not like you. They train, which is code for hit each other with expensive sticks, while servants hold umbrellas nearby. They don't carry, they don't dig, they don't haul water. They point at things and say, there. You say, yes, my lord, and carry it. Even the monks are better off. Their labour is holy. Yours is necessary. That's a fancy way of saying he writes about Jesus. You carry the dung bucket. But the worst jobs, the truly cursed labour, that's cleaning. You sweep the chapel floor. Dirt returns 5 seconds later. You scrub a cauldron that smells like regret. You empty chamber pots that could qualify as war crimes. You haul out soiled bandages, try not to gag, try not to cry, and bury them far enough away that someone doesn't trip over them and call it a relic. No one thanks you, not even God. Because this isn't virtuous labour. It's invisible labour. Labour that disappears the moment it's done. You clean the camp gets dirty again. You fix the wall collapses in the wind. You carry the water. Someone drinks it and yells that it tastes like rust. You can't win. You can't finish. You can't even quit. All you can do is continue until your body says otherwise. And then you'll be someone else's labour. You stop thinking in days. You start thinking in jobs, tasks, assignments. Not Tuesday. Just the day I lifted rocks until my arms trembled. Not Friday. Just the day I stirred a pot of goat soup so big it almost baptized me. Time flattens. Work fills every crack in it like mud. You used to ask what day it was. Now you ask what needs doing. And if the answer is nothing, that just means they haven't invented your next problem yet. You've lost track of what you were supposed to be. A crusader, a warrior for Christendom, a chosen man of purpose. You are a walking wheelbarrow now. You don't fight battles, you fight repetition, you fight rope burns, you fight the slow humiliation of doing something you were never trained to do, with tools that hate you, for people who won't remember your name, even if you carve it into the shovel. You once had pride. Now the closest thing to pride is stacking logs in a straight line and having someone not insult you afterward. That's a victory. That's an achievement. No one shouted. You're a hero. You tried to take joy in efficiency. You once carried 4 sacks instead of 2. You were trying to help. Your back hasn't been the same since. And no one noticed. The sacks were emptied into a fire pit because the cook thought they were rotten. They weren't. They were flour. You cried. Quietly. In the latrine trench. You didn't even get the good end of the trench. And still the jobs come. Patch that tent. Move that wheel. Hold this post. Haul this crucifix to the top of that hill for morning prayers. Then haul it back down so it doesn't get stolen by local villagers who think it's magic. You ask if we can just leave it there. You're told no. God prefers motion. Then there's the jobs they don't even name, like hold this guy up while he vomits, or scrape blood off the prayer stone, or bury whatever that was. These aren't tasks. They're ambient responsibilities. They appear without warning. You're just expected to know when it's your turn to deal with them. And every time someone dies, which is frequent, you dig. Again. Always back to the digging. The shovel is your sword now. Your cross. Your confession. You dig while others pray. You dig while others eat. You dig while a bishop gives a speech about sacrifice from a platform you helped build with a hammer you broke on your own thumb. No one mentions that part. They say it's all part of God's test. You don't remember taking the test. You're pretty sure this is detention. Even when you're not assigned work, you're still doing it. Mending your gear. Repairing your shoes with bits of twine and faith. Sharpening a knife that chipped 3 weeks ago but still counts as your only weapon. Washing your only tunic in brown water and pretending that made it better. Hanging it up. watching it get rained on, putting it back on anyway. You used to think chores were something you escaped on a holy journey. Turns out chores are the holy journey. Every crusader is a janitor, a hauler, a fixer of things no one wants to fix, and a doer of things no one wants to do. The nights ride past you while you're knee-deep in mud, trying to unclog a drainage ditch with a stick and a frown. They say, "God bless you," like they're tossing coins at a beggar. You smile, then return to poking the sludge. You want to ask, is this salvation? Is sanctity supposed to feel like manual labour and wet socks? Because your socks have never dried. Not once. You take them off and steam rises. You don't know if that's heat or decay. One has a hole so big it's just a warm ribbon at this point. The other is fused to your foot. You name it. Gerald. You and Gerald are in this together. You once saw a knight pray before battle. He knelt in shining armour, while a priest sprinkled holy water over his helmet. 2 hours later, you were sent to clean that same armour with an oily rag and 3 fingers of soap made from someone's grandmother's pig. That's your role here. Post-miracle maintenance. You clean the sacred, the mundane, the grotesque, all of it, no difference. Whether it's relics or waste buckets, your job is the same. Move it somewhere else. And the shame? Gone. You've wiped blood off an altar. You've emptied a wine jug into a fire to make room for rainwater. You've patched a bishop's robe using thread from a corpse's belt. At some point, shame packed up and left camp. You waved goodbye. You were too tired to ask why. You start measuring your worth in weird ways. How many buckets you carried today? How many bandages you boiled? How long you held the ladder before your arms gave out? Whether anyone yelled at you. Whether you were ignored. Which is somehow worse. Because being ignored means you're no longer a person. You're a shovel with a face. A mule with feelings. A ghost with chores. You overhear a priest say, "Work is divine." You want to laugh, but you can't. Not because it's not funny, it is, hysterically so, but because your throat is dry and your ribs ache when you exhale. And even then, someone hands you a rope and says, "Pull." You ask what it's tied to. They don't know, neither do you. But you pull it anyway, because that's what you do now. Pull, haul, bend, lift, stir, scrub, repeat. You've stopped asking why. You stopped around the same time you stopped recognising your own hands. They're not yours anymore. They belong to the work. And the worst part of the work isn't the weight. It isn't the pain. It isn't even the blood, the sweat, or the smell. And yes, there is always a smell. It's the slow erosion of meaning. The way your labour stops being something you do and becomes who you are. At some point, you realise you have stopped existing outside the task. You aren't Hugo from Rouen, or that guy with the limp and the 2 kids back home. You are the man who hauls water, or the man who sharpens stakes, or the one who digs holes and fills them back in. That's all. That's everything. No one asks your story. No one asks how you got here. No one even uses your name. They just call out the job. Help me with this beam. Sharpen more pegs. Dig, but faster. And you go, because not going means standing still. And standing still means thinking. And thinking means remembering. And remembering hurts more than labour ever could. You lift, not to serve, not to achieve, but to avoid yourself. Work becomes the shield between you and the world. If your hands are busy, your heart doesn't have to be. If you're exhausted enough, maybe you won't feel the guilt, or the fear, or the quiet ache of knowing that no matter how hard you sweat, You're not getting closer to anything but another hole to fall into. Your body rebels, but your mind negotiates. Just 1 more hour, it says. Then you can rest. Just finish this task. Then you can sleep. Just 1 more stone. 1 more log. 1 more trip back to camp with rope burns on your shoulder and a mouth full of dust. And when you finish, when you finally lay down, someone taps you on the shoulder. There's a fire. There's a fallen horse. There's a bishop who needs help wiping because he's strained his back preaching about humility. And you get up again, because refusal is just a longer route to punishment. You've seen what happens to men who say no. They get reassigned. Not to the lighter work, but to the invisible work. The meaningless jobs no one wants. Standing watch at empty paths, counting stones for inventory, polishing armour that will never be worn again. They become ghosts. Not hated, just unnoticed. No one talks to them. No one checks if they eat. They fade, quietly. One day you blink and they're gone. You don't want to disappear. So you carry the bucket, you grip the rope, you say yes, brother, even when your ribs feel like they're cracking with every breath and your fingers no longer close all the way. You watch a knight drop his sword during training and look around for someone to fetch it. You don't even hesitate. You bend. You lift. You place it in his hand like you're handing a child a toy. He doesn't thank you. He never has. You bow anyway. And then go back to stirring the communal pot of whatever used to be edible before it became soup. You think it had a name. It doesn't anymore. Now it's just meal. You ladle it, you serve it, you scrape the bottom. You pretend the black flakes are herbs. Every act you perform is now ceremonial. Not religious, just repetitive. Folding cloth, sorting ropes, counting nails. Things that once had meaning and now just fill the gaps in the day where death hasn't shown up yet. And even when battle does come, those few chaotic, unforgettable days when swords are drawn and arrows darken the sky, your role doesn't change much. You're still hauling, still running, still dragging wounded men out of ditches, fetching bandages, filling buckets with water, and praying it's not too late. You're not a warrior. You're battlefield glue. Afterward, when the screaming fades and the smoke clears, you're the one who buries the dead. Not with reverence, with routine, 1 body at a time. Stack, cover, repeat. A priest reads a psalm. You barely hear it. You're too focused on the next pile of limbs that needs arranging. You keep a tally, not because you're morbid, but because numbers feel like control. Today, 17 buried, 3 unidentified, 1 dug up again by dogs. You reinforce that one. You name him Peter, because the real name's gone. And in a twisted way, you start to need the work, because it's the only thing holding you together. You've forgotten how to rest. Rest makes you anxious. You lie down and your heart races. You close your eyes and your brain replays every mistake you ever made since you left home. You wake up before dawn and start piling firewood just to have something to do. Even prayer feels like labour now. You kneel, you recite, you bow, but you're not asking for grace. You're reciting instructions, a checklist to prove you're still functional. You know you're not okay when someone hands you a spade, and your first thought isn't, what is this for? But, finally. And the younger recruits? The new ones, fresh from Europe, with eyes that still shine, you avoid them, not out of cruelty, out of mercy, because their questions hurt more than wounds. What's our goal? How long until we reach the next city? Do you think we'll get to Jerusalem by spring? You don't answer. You just gesture vaguely toward the horizon and say, keep carrying. They stop asking after a week. Then they start carrying too. And so it goes. One job to the next. One day bleeding into another. Work without reward. Motion without destination. You're not part of an army. You're part of a machine. A creaky, blood-slicked, prayer-scented apparatus that turns living men into tired ones and tired men into bodies waiting for burial. You used to believe in glory. Now you believe in grip strength. Because if your fingers keep holding the rope, the handle, the ladle, the banner, whatever it is, then maybe you're still real, still here. And if you ever drop it, you're afraid you won't pick it back up. Here's the thing they didn't tell you when they handed you the cross and said, "Come join the holy cause." You're not on a level battlefield. You're on a slope, and you're at the bottom of it. The Crusades are not a brotherhood. They're a ladder. And like every good medieval ladder, it's wooden, splintered, vaguely cursed, and mostly used to push people down. At the top, knights, nobles, lords and bishops, men with armour that gleams even after a week of marching, because someone like you was forced to polish it with oil, ash and regret. They sit atop horses that have better diets than you. Their tents are dry. Their wine is real. Their beds have actual stuffing. Not straw. Not moss. Stuffing. You saw one noble bring a mattress from home. Carried by 4 servants, it took up 2 wagons. When asked why, he said, "My back does not serve God in discomfort." You meanwhile sleep in a divot filled with rainwater and a chunk of potato you lost 3 nights ago. And here's the worst part. The lords don't even know you exist. You march past them every day. You dig ditches they walk over. You boil water they wash with. But to them, you're not a man. You're a silhouette. A shape in the background. The labour equivalent of fog. Once you tried to greet one. You said, "Good day, my lord," and gave the smallest, humblest nod a neck can manage without dislocating. He looked at you like you'd farted in Latin and rode off without blinking. His squire apologised. To him. You learned. Nobles eat separately. Always. Under tents. Off of wooden plates lined with cloth. Their meat is seasoned. Their wine is imported. Their bread is soft. You've seen a bishop bless a chicken leg before eating it, then spit out the bone onto the grass like the Pope himself would sweep it up later. You're over by the cooking fire, fighting a beetle for the last turnip in the pot. Even the sounds of the camp are segregated. Over here grunts, groans, buckets splashing, bones cracking, curses muttered into sleeves. Over there, laughter. Mandolins. Someone reciting poetry. A flute, somehow. You're not sure where it came from. Maybe heaven. Maybe France. Either way, it's not for you. They play games while you clean boots. You mop blood off their banners while they drink and argue about divine favour. You patch a hole in the latrine wall while they debate whether to bring their falcons into battle for spiritual intimidation. You're not angry. You're not even surprised. You're just tired. Because you understand now, there are tears of suffering. Your tear is called necessary. Their tear is called holy. And when something goes wrong, when food runs low, when a wagon breaks, when the weather ruins the grain, or the soup turns rancid, or the enemy raids the supply line, guess who gets blamed? Not the planner, not the knight, not the man who made the decisions. You, the worker, the body, that you should have lifted more carefully, even though the rope was frayed and the wood was wet and nobody helped. You tried to defend yourself once. They say, are you questioning the will of God? You say no. You mean yes. They assign you to latrine duty for a week. You see things there that will never leave your dreams. But humiliation here isn't just consequence. It's built in. It's in how you're addressed. Boy, even if you're 40. Wretch. Thing. Sometimes not addressed at all. Just pointed at. It's in how you're fed. Last, late, or not at all. It's in how you're dismissed with a flick of a hand, or a foot, or a stick. You once saw a noble wave a fly swatter at a cook like he was shooing livestock. The cook bowed anyway. That's the hierarchy. You kneel not because you revere them, but because standing up invites attention. And attention is danger. Because all it takes is one bad hour, one noble's bad mood, and you're stripped, tied to a post, and flogged in front of a crowd who are just glad it's not them. You saw it once. A man caught stealing a loaf of bread. Not from the stores. From a rat's hoard. He was caught chewing. That was the crime. They made a show of it, tied his wrists, pulled up his shirt, called it justice while the priest read a psalm. 20 lashes. Skin came off by the 5th. Blood by the 8th. He passed out at 10. They finished all 20. They gave him water afterward, not because they cared, because they didn't want to waste a labourer if he could still move. He healed, slowly, quietly. Next week, he was stirring soup again. The knight who ordered the punishment asked for seconds. And you? You kept stirring, because you knew. It could have been you. There are 2 kinds of ceremonies in the Crusade camp. The official kind, and the kind where your soul leaks out through your boots. The official kind happens near the chapel tent. Or what passes for one. A canvas hut with 2 wooden crosses, a torn tapestry of St. Peter, and a lingering smell of melted tallow and fermented feet. This is where the knights go to be seen praying. They kneel in perfectly arranged lines, polished breastplates, glinting in the sun, heads bowed in angles choreographed like dance steps. You stand off to the side with the other workers, holding relics, or holding spears, or just holding still, because you weren't invited to participate, only to be present. Presence is important. You give the performance weight. Your silence says, this matters. It doesn't matter to you, of course. You haven't heard half the sermon. The priest speaks in Latin. Fast Latin, ritual Latin. The kind of Latin that sounds less like speech and more like a list of divine ultimatums. You caught a phrase once, miserere nobis. Have mercy on us. You almost laughed. Because mercy isn't distributed evenly here. It flows down the social ladder like spoiled wine, barely reaching the bottom before it's soaked up by someone more visible. At these services, you kneel, you pray, you cross yourself. Not for salvation, but for survival. Because being seen not praying is worse than not praying at all. A knight once caught a servant nodding off during Mass. Just for a second. Just a blink. The next day, he was made to stand in the centre of camp holding a heavy wooden cross for 3 hours while people threw mouldy bread at him. They called it penitence. You called it Thursday. And the other kind of ceremony, the one no one names, that happens every day. It's in the way you wait for food. Nobles are served first, always. Seated in chairs with dishes passed like gifts. Their bread is cut, their wine is poured, their meat is warm. You stand in a crooked line next to a bucket. You hold out your bowl, a dented piece of tin you found near the latrine and washed in the river. You keep your eyes down, because eye contact with a cook might get you skipped, or accidentally scolded. The ladle hits your bowl with a thud. Soup. If it's soup. Sometimes it's more of a suggestion. A broth made of broth. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. Once you found a feather, another time half a beetle. You just keep eating, because complaining is a privilege you can't afford. And if you finish too fast, no seconds, just a look. You should have savoured it, someone mutters. You nod, then chew on the wooden spoon a bit, just to keep the hunger from circling back too fast. Hierarchy lives in the tools too. The nobles have weapons, real ones, swords, maces, lances, engraved, sharpened, maintained. You? You have a stick. Maybe a knife. Maybe a rusted blade tied to a broom handle. The other day you saw someone carrying a rock in a sack. When asked what it was, he said, "A morning star." It wasn't a joke. Hierarchy decides who bleeds when a cart breaks. If a noble's horse collapses, 6 men rush to lift the saddle, carry it to shelter, brush the animal, and check the noble's boots for signs of stress. If you collapse, best case scenario, someone takes your shovel. Worst case, someone takes your boots. You've seen men drop dead in the mud. No one reacts. Just one less bowl to fill. One more space in the tent. One less hand competing for a job no one wants to do anyway. The hierarchy even speaks its own language. Nobles declare. Servants inform. Labourers suggest. You don't say things. You don't ask. You offer. Perhaps it would be better. I wonder if the barrel might... I was only thinking that, maybe. You speak in soft phrases, like you're tiptoeing around your own opinions. Because you are. You've learned to smother your tone, to neutralise every word before it leaves your mouth, to sound like fog. Present but ungraspable. Because too much voice is insubordination. And if you are seen, truly seen, by the wrong person at the wrong moment, you become an example. They love examples here. Discipline through display. You've seen it in all forms. A man who dropped a tent pole was made to carry it all day tied to his back like a cross. Another who argued with a scribe was shaved bald on one side of his head, publicly, then paraded around the camp while people sang hymns. A boy who laughed during a sermon was forced to kneel in gravel for hours, hands raised, holding candle in each, like some holy scarecrow offering himself to no one. The hierarchy thrives on these rituals. They're reminders, symbols. They say, this is where you are, stay there. Even the punishments are tiered. A noble caught stealing from the wine stores. A quiet talk. Maybe a few lashes, nothing serious. A servant caught doing the same. Stocks, public beatings, rations cut. A sermon about sin directed at no one, but clearly aimed. You don't resent it, not anymore. You just navigate it. Like rain. Like mud. You keep your head down. Your mouth shut. Your sleeves rolled. You call it wisdom. Because calling it what it really is, humiliation, would burn too much energy. And you need that energy. For digging. For hauling. For pretending it's all still holy. There's a moment, maybe a week in, maybe a month, when you realise you've stopped looking nobles in the eye. Not out of fear exactly. It's subtler than that. More automatic. Your head just dips when they pass. Your shoulders round. You become smaller, smoother, more digestible. Because the hierarchy isn't just enforced with punishments. It's sculpted over time, like erosion. 1,000 glances. 100 corrections. Dozens of quiet humiliations that teach your body how to move before your brain can catch up. You used to walk tall. Now you navigate like smoke. It starts when you're corrected in front of others. Something small. You held the bucket wrong. You stirred the pot too fast. You prayed too loudly. A knight points it out with a chuckle. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, even though nothing about it was funny. You think, it's just a joke. Then it happens again, and again, and soon you realise it's not a joke. It's a process. You're being shaped, filed down, turned into a tool that no longer looks like a man. Mockery becomes language, status, entertainment. The higher-ups don't tell jokes. They make them. Out of you. They nickname you. Not affectionately, performatively, loudly. One guy with a limp becomes Sir Hobbles. Another with a high voice is called the choir boy. A man who once cried during a funeral is just called Weepy. You became Bucket. No explanation. You were just holding one once when a squire decided the name fit. It stuck. You hear it now more than your own name, which most of them never knew anyway. Bucket, stir this. Bucket, hold that. Bucket, shut up. At first you resisted, quietly. Then you stopped. It was easier. You start to answer to it. Eventually you become it. Because resistance gets you noticed, and getting noticed gets you used. There's a man they call Dog. He barked once. As a joke. Now they have him growl on command. A noble will walk by, snap his fingers and say, "Dog, guard the fire." And he'll crouch beside the pit, baring his teeth. People laugh. He's not mad. Or at least he doesn't seem to be. He says it's easier this way. They stop hitting you if they're laughing. You believe him. There's a squire who throws stones at labourers while they work. Small ones. Always when backs are turned. He never gets punished. One of the cooks told him to stop once. That cook's tent mysteriously collapsed the next day. No one rebuilt it. Now everyone ducks silently when the stones come. It's easier than protesting. Even the priests get involved. Not always with cruelty, sometimes with pity, which is worse. "Ah, my child," one said, after you spilled a bucket of water. "So clumsy. The Lord must be testing you." He smiled like he meant well. You smiled back. Then cleaned the mud with your sleeve. The hierarchy infiltrates everything, even sleep. Nobles sleep in tents. With guards? With cushions? With fire nearby? You sleep outside, next to oxen. Wrapped in a blanket that smells like mildew and old potatoes. When it rains, you curl against the supply wagon and pray it doesn't roll. One night, a knight complained that his tent flap was flapping too loudly. You were woken at midnight and told to hold it closed by hand. You stood there for 4 hours in the wind, shivering, trying not to blink too hard in case it made a sound. When the sun rose, he tossed you a coin. It bounced off your forehead. He laughed. A loyal hinge. And you thanked him. Why? Because some part of you still believes praise means safety, and some of it does. For a moment, but not for long. Praise here is a leash. The more useful you are, the more visible. The more visible, the more vulnerable. You're elevated just high enough to be seen when something breaks, so they can blame you faster. Ask the man who once cooked a passable meal. They made him assistant to the quartermaster. He lasted 2 days before being accused of hoarding garlic. No trial, just lashes. Ask the boy who organised the tent supplies alphabetically. Someone claimed it was heresy. An unnatural order of things, a bishop said. God sorts by virtue, not letter. He was reassigned to grave digging, alone. You keep your talent secret now. You dull your voice. You fake ignorance. You pretend you can't count higher than 10, and even that's only because you have fingers to cheat with. Anything more is ambition, and ambition from someone like you is insubordination. The nobles can have pride. You can have silence. And sometimes you start to believe the things they say. Maybe you were clumsy. Maybe you were simple. Maybe you were born for this. To carry, to hold, to scrub, to stay quiet. You catch your reflection in a bucket and don't recognise it. Sunburnt skin, eyes dull from sleeplessness, hair matted, lips cracked, posture bent like a question you've stopped asking. You look like a man who lost an argument with gravity. You've stopped speaking unless spoken to. You no longer walk toward people, only behind them. You kneel before you're told. You smile without feeling it. You nod without hearing the words. And when someone spits near your feet, you step around it. Just instinct, not because you're afraid, because it doesn't even register as wrong anymore. That's what humiliation does when it's repeated often enough. It becomes normal. Eventually, you stop blaming them. The knights, the priests, the squires who laugh when you trip, the nobles who shout your name only when they need something heavy, moved, or something light cleaned. You stop hating them because hating takes energy, and because hating requires comparison, and you've run out of contrast. You've been at the bottom for so long, you no longer believe there is a top, just a slightly drier version of the same trench. So you accept, not like a decision, not like an oath, more like how a bruise fades, slowly, invisibly, until one day you don't remember what that part of you looked like before. You don't even flinch anymore when someone throws something near you. You just assume it's your job to pick it up. And if it's not, you pick it up anyway, just in case. You speak in yes. You think in maybe I deserve it, because hierarchy has a gravity. It pulls. It realigns your spine. It edits your story. At the start of this journey, you were someone, a farmer, a mason, a son, a husband. You had pride in your hands, in your name, in the way you walked. Now, you are the one who holds the rope. You are the one who takes the blame when the firewood is damp. You are the body that stands nearby in case something needs moving, carrying, burning, burying, scrubbing, fetching, fixing, or enduring. You're not a man. You're a utility. A broom with thoughts. A coat rack with organs. A name-shaped silhouette that exists to prevent nobility from touching anything unpleasant. And the strange thing? People like you start reinforcing it. You catch yourself correcting someone newer than you. No, don't look the knight in the eye. No, don't speak unless asked. No, you can't eat until the banner is folded properly. You say it like advice, but it's not. It's warning. You're handing out maps of your own prison. Not out of cruelty, out of kindness. Because you remember how it felt to get it wrong. And part of you is proud. Proud that you've lasted. That you've adapted. Proud that your back hasn't broken yet. That your knees still bend. That you've only been whipped once, and it healed crooked, but it healed. Because down here, survival is success. Dignity is optional. Longevity is victory. And even that has rules. You've seen what happens to those who forget the game. One man, a tailor by trade, started adjusting the hem of a noble's cloak without permission. Said he was trying to help. The noble turned slowly. Asked, "Do I look like I need help?" He didn't wait for an answer. He spat. The tailor was reassigned to horses, specifically to collecting their waste by hand. You met him weeks later. His hands were permanently stained. He didn't make eye contact. He whispered, even when alone. He told you, "I said the wrong thing once, and now they say nothing to me at all." That's the final layer of humiliation, not public punishment. Invisibility. You would almost prefer the beatings. At least someone looked at you then. At least you mattered enough to hurt. But when you vanish, when no one sees you anymore, that's the moment you start seeing yourself less. You forget the sound of your voice. You stop smiling. You laugh only when others do, and only a second after. You measure your existence in utility. If you're not useful, you're not real. You've watched men disappear this way. Still breathing, still walking, but gone. You passed them in the camp. Shadows with hands. They carry loads, stir pots, obey orders. They don't talk. They don't react. They work until they stop. Then they're buried without names. You try not to become one of them, but you feel it happening. In the way your head dips instinctively now when someone speaks, in how you apologise when someone bumps into you, in how your prayers have shifted, no longer asking for strength or purpose, just the ability to make it through one more day without attracting attention. You no longer dream of glory. You dream of not getting noticed. Once, someone complimented you, not for a job well done, for being quiet, obedient, useful. You said thank you, and meant it. That night, you wept, silently, into your blanket. You made sure no one heard. You couldn't even name why. Not because you missed home, not because your body hurt, not because you were afraid of dying. You cried because you realised you're more afraid of standing out than of disappearing. And that's what the Crusades really do to you. Not just break your back, not just exhaust your limbs, not just rub your identity raw with toil and hunger and filth, but slowly, patiently, systematically, they teach you that your suffering only matters if it doesn't bother anyone else. And once you believe that, once you wear that belief like a second skin, you've become exactly what they needed you to be all along. Not a man, not a pilgrim, not even a servant. Just part of the machinery. Self-correcting, self-silencing, efficient, invisible, replaceable. A crusader in the truest sense. Too broken to question. Too tired to resist. Too useful to stop. You join the Crusades for God. Well, that's what you were told, over and over. In whispers, in sermons, in taverns, on scrolls passed from monastery to town square. Go, march, fight, the Lord calls you. The Holy Land weeps for Christian boots. The soil itself demands your piety, and your sword. And maybe you believed it. Maybe the thought stirred something in you. Not just faith, but meaning. A cause. Bigger than your debt. Bigger than your hunger. Bigger than your name, which even you were starting to forget. But now you wonder if faith was just the packaging. Because what you found here, in the mud, under the banners, behind the chanting, isn't a church. It's a system. Faith is part of the infrastructure, woven into every tent rope, smudged on every bread crust, embedded in every order, no matter how mundane or violent. You don't get told what to do anymore. You get told what God wants, which is worse, because you can argue with a man. But how do you argue with heaven? When someone tells you, fetch more water, and you groan, you're lazy. But when someone tells you, the Lord demands cleanliness for his flock, and you hesitate, you're heretical. And there are punishments for heresy, not just social, not just physical, eternal. You start hauling buckets again, the rules blur. Where does scripture end and orders begin? One priest insists that sharpening a spear is sacred work, preparing the Lord's wrath. Another says it's vanity. Steel is for the proud, faith is for the righteous. So which is it? You don't know. You just sharpen it when told. Dull it when told. burn it if ordered. You've stopped trying to understand. Your theology now consists of 5 words. Don't. Make. The priest. Angry. Because here, belief isn't about truth. It's about who has the louder voice. And the louder voices always belong to men in robes, or with swords, or both. And they never agree. One sermon says Jerusalem is the key to God's heart. The next says Jerusalem is symbolic, and we're really marching for inner salvation. One priest says fasting is holy. Another says starving weakens the army, and anyone refusing food is sinning against the mission. You once heard 2 bishops argue about whether cheese was acceptable during Lent. They screamed, "Cheese." You stirred soup while they did. Eventually, they compromised. Cheese was permitted only if it had been blessed. One of them held up a wheel of goat cheese and muttered Latin over it like a man casting out demons. You were sent to deliver it to a knight. He threw it at a dog. The dog ate it. You weren't sure what that meant spiritually. The contradictions pile up. God wants blood, but not yours. God wants obedience, but not from the wrong class. God wants Jerusalem, but not if it's inconvenient this season. You start to realise belief is elastic. It stretches to fit the shape of the moment, to justify the work, to pad the punishment, to explain the misery without ever fixing it. And your job, your faithful duty, is to agree, because questioning means you don't trust. And not trusting means you're lost. And being lost in a crusade camp is dangerous, physically, morally, cosmically. So you keep quiet. You nod through sermons you don't understand. You recite prayers you've mumbled so many times they no longer have syllables, just rhythm. You bow before relics that might just be bones from a dead pig. You kiss icons with flaking paint and pretend you feel something other than splinters. And every time a priest points to the horizon and says, "We suffer for him," you nod. Even though you know full well that he is never the one carrying the logs, or sleeping under rain-soaked wool, or coughing up dust after scrubbing the bishop's latrine with a rag blessed by someone who's never even lifted a hammer. And still you obey. Because belief isn't just obedience here. It's a survival skill. It's currency. The more pious you look, the less likely you are to get reassigned to burying dead mules. The more you genuflect, the more likely someone else gets the blame when the cooking fire goes out. So you cross yourself before meals. You quote scripture badly. You learn the difference between the "Our Father" said by heart, and the "Our Father" said loud enough to be heard by someone powerful, and somewhere along the way, faith stops being a feeling. It becomes posture, repetition, shape. You hold your hands a certain way. You speak in pious tones. You pause before using knives, just in case the spirit of St. George is watching. You don't believe in angels, but you believe in eyes, because someone is always watching. And if they see the wrong thing, a joke made too loudly, a missed blessing, a half-hearted hymn, they might report you. And then comes the visit. A short talk with a priest, just a few questions. Do you love the Lord? Have you had impure thoughts? Do you ever doubt our purpose here? They always smile. They always touch your shoulder. Their hands are cold. Their teeth are straight. Their eyes are endless. You answer yes, no, never. And if your voice wavers, if your eyes dart, if your breath hesitates, you're marked. Not punished always, just watched. And then others watch you too. Your work is inspected more closely. Your food comes a bit later. You're left off the morning prayers. No one says why, but you feel it. Belief here is communal, and communities turn fast. So you tighten up. You speak less. You smile more. You bow deeper. You repeat whatever phrase the priest says with just enough zeal to avoid standing out, but not so much zeal that it looks like you're compensating. Because looking guilty is almost as bad as being guilty. And guilt here is inherited, contagious, assumed, like a plague or a heresy. You've learned that religion here is not about peace, it's about performance. Salvation isn't earned, it's demonstrated. Not in moments of quiet reverence, but in routines, gestures, vocal volume. You must look pious, sound pious, move pious. Faith is theatre, and you're on stage every hour of the day. There is a system for this. You start your mornings with prayer, mandatory, not personal, not contemplative, just scheduled. Bells ring, everyone assembles, you kneel, you recite. A priest speaks in circles while you nod like you understand. You know the phrases now. Blessed are the clean in spirit. Blessed are the meek who march. Blessed are the bruised, for their pain is holy. You mumble your amen. Not too loud, not too soft. You genuflect with the right hand. You make the sign of the cross exactly once. Too many times look suspicious, like you're faking it. Too few, and someone reports you. That happened to someone. His name was Peter. Or Thomas, you forget. He didn't kneel fast enough one morning, someone whispered. The next day, he was gone from the prayer circle. You saw him later near the dung trench, shoveling in silence with a split lip. You didn't ask questions. You just crossed yourself twice, to be safe. And now, you notice everything. Not just your own posture. Everyone's. Who kneels the slowest? Who mumbles? Who itches their face during a psalm? Who forgets to bow before the holy relic that may or may not be a melted spoon blessed by someone's cousin? You hate this part of yourself, this watcher you've become, but you need it, because belief isn't private anymore. It's not a whisper in the dark. It's a badge. And the more badges you collect, the safer you are. There's a man in camp who prays before every single action, before lifting a bucket, before tying a rope, before scratching his beard. His hands are always folded, his words always whispered. People call him the saint. You've seen him spit in someone's food. He still gets first dibs at dinner, because piety here doesn't make you good. It makes you untouchable. And so the rituals multiply. You don't just eat. You bless the meal. You name the saints. You sprinkle salt in a pattern someone told you was sacred geometry. You don't just sleep. You mutter protection prayers. You place charms near your blanket. A twig. A bone fragment. A ring someone said belonged to a monk. You once saw a man kiss a rock before bed. You asked why. He said it kept demons away. You believed him. You kissed your own rock that night, because better safe than devoured by spirits. Superstition becomes liturgy. You knock 3 times on the supply cart before unloading it. You avoid stepping on the same patch of mud twice. You say Pax Christi every time someone coughs. It doesn't matter if it works. It only matters that you look like you think it works. Doubt is not welcome here, even silent doubt. Once, someone asked why the relic smelled like fish. He was told, "Your faith is weak." He laughed, a light chuckle. 3 days later, he was reassigned to watch duty at night, alone, near the woods, where wolves howl and lanterns go missing. You haven't seen him since. You never asked about him. That's another thing faith teaches you here. Don't ask. Don't ask where someone went. Don't ask why someone's lashes were bloodied. Don't ask why the holy bread tastes like sawdust, or why the bishop keeps a pouch of coins beneath his robe. Don't ask why God speaks most clearly through the men who sleep in the softest tents. And especially don't ask what happens if none of this is real. Because then you're not just tired, you're dangerous. Doubt is infectious. You don't even need to say it out loud. Just a look. Just a pause before prayer. Just one moment of hesitation during a blessing, and you'll see people step away from you like your shadow's grown fangs. So you nod. You bless. You fold. And you build little shrines in your mind. Shrines made of ritual, not hope. Because hope hurts. Hope requires space. Ritual just needs time. And there's always time in the Crusades. You follow saints you don't know. Names recited like passwords. Saint Cuthbert, Saint Euphemia, Saint Blasius. You're not sure what they did. One may have been a dentist. One may have fought dragons. The bishop says they're watching over you. You hope they're not. You hope no one is. Because if they're watching and they still let this happen, then belief isn't comfort, it's cruelty. But you don't say that. You say, "Blessed be the banner." You say, "The Lord strengthens the weary." You say, "Glory to him who leads us." And you grip your shovel like a rosary. Because down here, holiness is not about grace. It's about discipline, control, compliance. And the deeper you go, the more you realise faith here is not about believing in something. It's about belonging to something, whether or not it deserves you. There's a saying you overheard a knight repeat, one of those phrases passed down like scripture, but never written anywhere official. The devil walks in the dust. You thought it was poetic once. Now you understand its policy, because in this place, everything you don't understand is evil. Every unexplained sickness, every accident, every strange noise at night, every spoiled ration, every broken wheel, every cracked pot, every cough that lingers too long. It all points in one direction. Satan. Not metaphorically. Literally. They mean it. You saw a man trip during a procession. His sandal snapped. He hit the ground hard, laughed it off, said it was just bad luck. The priest didn't laugh. He dipped his thumb in ash, marked the man's forehead, and muttered a Latin chant, then declared the man was tainted by shadow. The next day, the man was marched to the chapel tent. 3 priests stood in a triangle. A bowl of salt, a candle, a goat's skull. Unclear if symbolic or just left there by accident. They performed an exorcism, not a dramatic one. Not screaming or spinning or biblical thunder. Just slow chanting, repetitive Latin. Eyes fixed on the man as he knelt in silence, probably wondering how his bad shoe turned into a demonic accusation. Afterward, he wasn't spoken to for 3 days. And then, as if the exorcism had erased the whole thing, he was handed a pail and told to resume mucking the horses. He never limped again. Out of fear, not healing. You learn that everything here has ritual consequences. You speak out of turn during a sermon. You're silenced, not with rope, but with fasting. You're told to go without food for spiritual purification. You don't argue. You just starve politely and try not to faint during shovel duty. You hear voices at night. You're not given water or warmth. You're told you've been touched, and you must confess everything, even dreams, even thoughts, especially thoughts. They want to know what you thought about when you were alone, if it included envy, lust, doubt, fear. You lie, because the truth gets you watched, and watching leads to accusation. An accusation leads to punishment. Punishment here is not always pain. It's often spectacle. You've seen cleansings, public rituals. The accused kneels, shirtless, in the square. A priest reads a list of sins that may or may not be real: coveting, rebellion, impure gazes, mockery of the sacred. Then come the acts, ash smeared on their back, holy water flicked in the eyes, a slap, always just one, not hard enough to bruise, just enough to mark a moment. A bell rung 3 times, a Latin chant that ends with silence so loud it presses on your skull like a second sun. They call it forgiveness, but no one forgets. The cleansed man is always treated differently afterward, not hated, just filtered. Like a smudge on a mirror, no one wants to admit is there. You start policing yourself before they can. You rehearse your prayers. You make your signs tighter, cleaner. You whisper apologies for things you haven't done, just in case. And in the spaces where real questions should live, is this right? Does God truly want this? Are we any closer to holiness than when we left home? You stuff verses, lines of scripture, half-remembered psalms. Because silence is suspicious, and reflection is rebellion. You saw it happen to a man once. A quiet man, thoughtful, soft-spoken. He asked a priest what the difference was between sacrifice and punishment, politely, curiously. The priest smiled, and then sent him to the relic tent to kneel for 12 hours. No food, no water, just kneeling. In front of a bone wrapped in silk that someone claimed was a saint's thumb. He came back, changed, not angry, not broken, just blank, like someone erased his questions and left the rest. You haven't spoken to him since, but you sometimes catch him staring at the same relic, lips moving, no sound, as if he's still there. And you pray harder, not to God, not really. You pray to avoid being noticed. You pray to not ask questions. You pray that your silence doesn't look too proud, too withdrawn, too individual, because that too can be interpreted as heresy of the ego. Belief becomes surveillance. Even nature is recruited. A sudden storm? God is testing us. A streak of blood on a tent? A sign? A raven that lands near the chapel? Omen? A sneeze during prayer? Demonic interference? You sneeze once, accidentally. The priest blesses your nose and tells you to sleep near the fire, so the warmth might drive out the darkness. You sleep with one eye open, unsure if you're being protected or punished. The fire crackles. You hear whispers behind you. You don't ask. You never ask. Because knowledge is a liability, and clarity is not the goal. Ambiguity is power. If belief is a fog, then those in charge decide what you see through it, and they change the shapes whenever they need to justify the next command. You don't walk in light here, you walk in rules, unwritten, shifting, enforced by fear. And your compliance isn't measured in loyalty. It's measured in how small you're willing to make yourself, not just in posture, in thought, in desire, in memory. Because if you let yourself want anything, comfort, answers, fairness, you're already on the edge. The only safe emotion here is obedience, and even that is sometimes suspicious. You forget when you stop believing. You just remember when you stop noticing. There's no dramatic break, no thunderbolt of doubt, no climactic cry of, I can't do this anymore. Just a slow erosion, like wind on stone. One morning, you wake up and realise you haven't felt anything during prayer in weeks. You go through the motions, hit every word, bow at the correct lines, murmur the right blessings, but it's muscle memory now. Faith isn't something you carry. It carries you like a stretcher, like a cage. You don't ask why anymore. You just assume the answer is either God's will or you're unworthy. And either way, it doesn't change what's expected of you. Kneel, recite, obey. You once tried to pray honestly, without formula. Just whispered your fears into the dirt, asked for strength, clarity, peace. You whispered until your throat cracked. No one answered. You haven't tried again. It's not that you stopped believing in God. It's that God has been crowded out by rules, by superstition, by obligation, by repetition, by fear, by ritual piled on ritual until there's no air left in the chapel tent. Only the smell of beeswax and men pretending to be unbroken. You look around during prayer now, not with reverence, but with caution. Who's watching? Who's mouthing the words? Who's still? Who's too still? The holiest men you know are the ones with the least warmth. Cold-eyed priests who sleep soundly while others scream from wounds. Who bless the wine, but hoard the bread. Who say God loves you in the same voice they use to assign latrine duty. You know the rhythm of the services better than your own heartbeat. Morning chant, communion, silent kneel, scripture, confession, punishment, because there's always punishment. If not for you, for someone. Someone will always be made an example. Not because they sinned, because someone needed to be reminded. You've started to wonder if belief was ever about the divine at all, or if it was just a mechanism to keep the wheels turning. A holy leash, a sanctified rhythm. You've seen priests argue over who gets to bless which fire, which song is proper, whether a sneeze during prayer voids the blessing. You've seen men beaten for misquoting verses. You've seen someone forbidden from singing because his voice offends the angels. And you've watched every one of them return, bruised and humiliated, to the same prayer line the next day. Because what else is there? This is the only structure left, and people cling to structure when everything else has rotted. You've seen a man confess to sins he clearly didn't commit just to avoid suspicion. I took extra bread. I had impure thoughts. I didn't feel moved by the homily. The priest nodded, assigned penance, gave him a thin wafer, sent him on his way. It wasn't about justice, it was about processing. The whole system functions like a religious laundromat. You put in shame, and out comes permission to go on surviving. And if you don't participate, you disappear. Not physically, socially, spiritually. No one shares food with you. No one shares space. You become a theological risk, a gap in the moral tapestry, a question mark in a world that has outlawed curiosity. So you play along. You say grace before soup. You cross yourself before relieving yourself in the woods. Because one priest once warned that demons live near the roots of cursed trees. You whisper Amen before tying knots. You whisper forgive me when stepping on thorns. You thank God when you stub your toe and don't bleed, just in case he's listening. Just in case not thanking him causes something worse later. You live in a cloud of maybes. Maybe that itch is divine punishment. Maybe that bad dream was prophecy. Maybe your sore throat is a message from the saints telling you to fast. Maybe your punishment was mercy, because others were punished harder, and that must mean you were spared. You start seeing signs in everything. A broken cup means someone is cursed. A rat that crosses your path means you've fallen from grace. A bird call at dusk? Definitely a warning. You don't know of what, but the priest tightened his jaw when he heard it, and that's enough. Even silence is suspicious. One night, no one in camp speaks for a full hour. A quiet settles over the tents like ash. No prayers, no coughs, just nothing. The next day, 5 men are reassigned to isolation detail. You never find out why. The priest calls it spiritual realignment. You call it a reminder. You begin to understand that here, on this journey, in this pit dressed as a pilgrimage, faith isn't about reaching for God. It's about shrinking, making yourself small enough to avoid punishment, quiet enough to avoid accusation, holy enough to avoid replacement. You don't aspire to heaven anymore. You aspire to not be noticed. And even that feels like pride. You apologize for your existence in subtle ways. The way you walk, the way you eat, the way you take up space. Your prayer is no longer, Lord, save me. It's, Lord, don't look too closely. And still you cross yourself, still you sing, still you genuflect in the mud like it's marble. Because what else is there? Doubt is dangerous. Silence is suspicious. Hope is a liability. And faith? Faith is now just the path of least destruction. You thought the horror would arrive all at once. A scream, a slaughter, a breaking sky, and a battlefield soaked with divine purpose. But horror here comes slowly, in pieces, like a bad smell, faint at first, then inescapable. You thought you were marching toward a war. You were wrong. You're marching into lunacy. And it wears a cross. The first thing you notice is the noise. Not war drums, not swords clashing, but people, talking, muttering, praying, arguing, chanting, screaming, laughing at things that aren't funny, weeping at things that haven't happened. The sounds blur together. Constant. Gnawing. Someone sobs next to the well. When asked why, they say the water has the face of a saint in it. They won't drink. They're afraid of drowning in grace. A man screams about Jerusalem from atop a pile of crates. He insists he saw it in a dream, floating, golden, glowing, 3 days east of here, behind the trees where angels whisper. No one knows what he means. A few people follow him anyway. He disappears into the woods. No one returns. Another man walks in circles, 9 circles, always 9. He says it's to keep the devil confused. His feet bleed. He doesn't stop. And this is all before a single blade is drawn. Because the crusade doesn't just kill with war. It kills with the waiting, the hunger, the rot, the contradictions that never resolve. One day you're told to fast to please God. The next you're told to feast to celebrate a victory that hasn't happened yet. You eat mouldy bread, then get scolded for not being grateful. You refuse wine to stay alert, then get punished for denying God's generosity. You're given a candle to carry through the night. It drips on your hand, burns your skin. You're told it's a reminder of Christ's sacrifice. You ask for a rag. They say no. Pain makes the soul more visible to heaven. Someone actually says that. With a straight face, while pouring boiling water into a basin filled with lice-covered tunics. You want to scream. You want to laugh. You do neither. Because both reactions are punishable. And then, finally, comes the violence. Not in glorious charges or trumpet blasts. Not in rows of gleaming armour and heroics. No, it comes like weather. Sudden, inevitable, ugly. It begins with shouting, then fire, then a raid. You don't even know who attacked, or why. You just hear the bell. Not the chapel bell, the other one. The one they hit with an axe handle. One that means, whatever you're doing, stop. It's time to panic. You run, you hide, you grab a tool, not a weapon, you don't have one. Just something metal or wooden or sharp enough to look like you tried. The knights ride out. The priests bless their backs. The rest of you stay behind and defend tents, animals, food, relics. You hear steel on steel. You hear a scream, human, then not. You see someone run past you, clutching a torn-up banner like it's a life preserver. You see a boy, no older than 12, stab a man with a broken ladle. You don't know who lived. Later, you help stack bodies. You're not told to, it's just obvious. They smell, they rot, they attract flies that bring disease. You find one body without a head. Someone says, he died for the Lord. Someone else says, he shouldn't have worn red, it draws arrows. You don't say anything, because words feel stupid now. You clean blood from stones. You try not to think about whose blood. The priests burn herbs to cleanse the air. It just smells like burning oregano and dried piss. You help dig a grave. One of the dead has a coin in his mouth. Someone removes it before burial. He says, God doesn't need tips. He keeps the coin. Later that night, he vomits. Someone says he's cursed. Someone else says it was bad meat. Someone else prays over his feet just in case. You're told this is normal. This is holy. This is what devotion looks like. A week later, another fight. Not a battle. An argument. Over spoons. 2 men. One blames the other for taking a wooden spoon that wasn't his. They scream. They push. One grabs a rock. There's blood. One is dead. The priest declares it a righteous dispute. Orders the survivor to clean the chapel tent as penance. He agrees. Cheerfully. The next day he sings while scrubbing. You start to wonder if he ever stopped singing. More people arrive from another camp. They say their priest was struck by lightning while urinating. Half of them think it was divine punishment. The other half think it was a miracle. All of them are crying. They haven't slept in 3 days. They ask if your camp has any relics that haven't started bleeding. You say no. They look disappointed. You realise they wanted one. You realise they wanted proof that God was still paying attention, even if it was by punishing them. You realise something else. No one here is sane. Not the leaders. Not the soldiers. Not the cooks or priests or followers or even you. This isn't a holy army. This is a moving asylum. A slow parade of trauma and prophecy, hallucination and hygiene failures, all dressed up in scripture and steel. You watch someone confess to a sin he hadn't committed just to feel seen. You watch someone else start committing sins, stealing, lying, sabotaging food, just to test whether anyone was watching at all. They weren't. He stopped. Not out of guilt, out of disappointment. The horror here isn't just in the violence, it's in the absurdity. How nothing makes sense, but everyone keeps marching. How pain becomes normal. How rot becomes acceptable. How faith is indistinguishable from fever. And the worst part, you adjust. You stop flinching when people scream. You stop asking who's dead. You step around blood instead of cleaning it. You start praying less for survival and more for clarity. Not to escape, not to be saved. Just to understand if this madness has meaning. Or, if that's the final joke, that there isn't one. They say a siege is a strategy, but what they don't tell you is that it's also a ritual. Longer than a battle, louder than a prayer, dumber than both. You've been outside this city for days, or weeks. Time bends when nothing changes but the smell. No one remembers the name of the city anymore. Some call it Saracen Hold. Some call it that stone place. One priest insists it's actually the biblical I reborn in sin. No one argues. No one cares. The gates are closed. The walls are high. And so we wait. That's the siege. That's the whole thing. Dig trenches. Build towers. Burn wood. Haul stones. Drag mangled catapult arms into place while flies eat your calves alive. Pray for rain. Pray for it to stop raining. Boil water. Ration wine. Get sunburnt. Get frostbite. Repeat. Somewhere in there, you sleep. Sieges do not unfold. They rot. And when they move, they do so all at once, like a dead horse exploding. The knights try their ladders first. That fails. The defenders drop hot oil. A few bodies fall. One is still burning when he hits the ground. The men around you cheer. You don't. The next tactic? Tunnelling. Yes, tunnelling. They send you, the expendables, to dig under the walls, hoping to collapse the foundation. You crawl through mud, stone, and darkness with a bucket, a pickaxe, and a prayer. No one tells you what to do if the tunnel succeeds. It doesn't. It floods with sewage and someone's idea of holy water. You vomit twice, maybe from the smell, maybe from the idea of what just touched your skin. When you emerge, a priest blesses you. Not with oil, with a slap. God protects the humbled, he says. You are not protected. You are just wet. Later that week, the dead pile up. Not from battle, from infection, from thirst, from the stew that smelled like varnish. You dig graves, then dig more. Then realise there's no more space, so you burn the rest. A bishop insists the ashes are evidence of devotion. He stands near the fire, humming hymns while hair and teeth blacken in the flame. The next morning someone uses the ashes to write Deus Vult on a tent. You stare at it for a full hour, and then you keep walking. That's the worst part of all of this. Not the blood, not the rot, not the lunacy, the adjustment. How quickly you normalise the grotesque. How you see a man lose a hand and think, at least it wasn't both? How someone gets beheaded by accident, a misjudged axe swing, and your only thought is, well, now we need another cook. One day a child is brought into camp, alone, barefoot, covered in blood. She speaks a language no one knows. Some say she's a demon. Some say a sign. The priests take her. The next day, the chapel tent is silent. You never see her again. Someone claims she ascended. Someone else says they saw her body near the grain sacks. No one investigates. Because here, evidence is irrelevant. Belief rewrites facts faster than memory can keep up. And speaking of memory, yours is fading. You forget people's names. Not just those who die, the ones who live. They blur. The man with the limp. The woman with the cough. The boy with the 2 white teeth. You nod at them. You work beside them. You forget them by dusk. You forget what you looked like before the journey. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a bucket. Skin grey, lips cracked, eyes ringed like bruises. A beard you don't remember growing. Hands shaking, always shaking. You try to pray. The words feel stale, thin, like reciting the instructions on a shovel. You stop mid-verse. You look up at the clouds and wonder, not for the first time, if God has already left. And if he did he walk? Did he ride? Or did he just slip away while everyone was singing too loudly to notice? Then the hallucinations begin, not dramatic ones. No flaming swords or prophetic dreams. Just flickers. You think you see faces in the trees. You hear voices where there are none. You feel insects on your skin that aren't there. Until they are. One night, you swear the stars rearrange into Latin phrases. You don't read Latin. The next day, a scribe tells you he's seen the same thing. You both nod. Then dig another trench. That's the rhythm now. Horror. Absurdity. Repeat. You clean a blade that hasn't been used in days, just to keep your hands busy. You carry a bucket with no water, just in case someone asks you to carry something. You bow to a knight who doesn't see you, because if he did see you, He might ask you to scrub blood off his boots again, and you still don't know if it was human or pig. And when a man in robes announces that the city will fall because God has grown tired of their wickedness, you don't cheer. You don't speak. You just nod. Because you too are tired. And wickedness seems like a small thing compared to what we've become. You watch a man dig a hole and fill it with fire. He calls it a holy warning. To whom? No one knows. Someone throws in a severed hand. Someone else throws in their last bit of wine. A third man jumps in. You're told he was possessed. You're told he's blessed. You're told not to ask. You don't. Eventually the madness stops surprising you. That's when you know you're lost. You stop asking why people scream at night. You stop asking what's in the stew. You stop asking what that smell is, or who burned, or why the bishop is laughing again. It's not that you understand. It's that you've run out of questions. Because somewhere between the fasting and the dying and the praying and the digging and the bleeding and the chanting and the smoke, you realise this isn't chaos anymore. It's a schedule, a ritualised, sacred routine of horror. It even has a shape. Morning. You wake up to the smell of burning hair. You don't ask whose. Prayer. You kneel. The priest forgets a line. No one corrects him. Everyone claps. Work. You carry barrels. You dig pits. You scrape black slime off the meat tent. Midday. Someone dies. Someone always dies. You stop asking how. Afternoon. A knight demands your cloak. You give it to him. He sneezes on it. You thank him. Evening. A new sermon. This one about sacrifice. Someone is selected to fast on behalf of the others. They cry. Everyone pretends it's beautiful. Night screams. Always. Never explained. Sleep. If you're lucky. If the lice and the dreams don't eat you first. And then it starts again. This isn't an accident. This is the system now. A kind of theology built on collapse. A spiritual economy of waste. Even the punishments follow a sacred pattern. For blasphemy, you kneel on salt. For doubt, silence, forced. 3 days without speaking, not even to pray. If you do, someone rats you out. For heresy, a bucket of pig's blood over your head, followed by forced washing in front of others. It's not just shame, it's choreographed shame. The bishop says it purifies the soul by lowering the flesh. You want to scream. You don't. You wash the pig's blood off your own hands, not because you sinned, but because you helped pour it, because you were told to, and because refusing orders is the only unforgivable sin here. No one tells you that outright. You learn it by watching. A man refuses to help bury a knight he claims raped his cousin. He says no, quietly, respectfully. By nightfall, he's lashed to a post and told to recite psalms until his voice breaks. He lasts 3 days. By then, everyone agrees it was divine punishment for a different sin. You watch it happen. You say nothing. Because truth here is fluid. It obeys hierarchy, not evidence. And the higher up someone is, the more truth they own. The bishop says God speaks through dreams. It becomes law. A knight sees a dove land near the chapel. He declares the city will fall in 5 days. It doesn't. He says it was a metaphor. Everyone nods. You once asked what metaphor the dead mule represented. No one laughed. You were assigned manure detail for a week, but even absurdity has formed here. There are saints for everything now. Saint Gaspar of Boils, prayed to for skin rot. Saint Lucia the Starved, invoked when rations run out. Saint Dogface, no one remembers why. There's just a carved bone they worship once a week. And then there's the Feast of No Meat. a holy day invented 2 weeks ago when all the livestock died mysteriously. The priest claimed it was God's will, a fast through absence. He held a service over a table of empty bowls, called it a feast of gratitude for restraint. You were so hungry your hands shook. You wept silently into your own spit. No one noticed. They were too busy humming. There's a man who claps every time someone dies, says it's applause for their arrival in heaven. At first people were horrified, then curious, then joined in. Now it's custom. Applause at death. You've seen people start dying slower, as if waiting for it. As if it means something. You've started clapping too. Because silence is rebellion. And rebellion is never theological, only demonic. There was a girl who asked if the relics were fake, just asked. She was made to carry each one, 17 relics, each blessed, in her arms while marching barefoot around camp for a full day. By the time she finished, she couldn't speak. Her legs bled. Someone said she glowed. The next day, she was gone. Some say she was exalted. You saw blood on the relic cloth. You don't ask, because asking is the last thing that gets taken. Once you stop asking, you're safe. Once you stop noticing, you belong. Once the horror becomes your clock, and the absurdity becomes your compass, and the rituals become your body movements, there's no danger left, just direction, just drift. Just days that fold in on themselves like wet linen. One man has stopped speaking entirely. He points to birds now. Always birds. Every time a sparrow flies past, he screams, points, and draws a cross on his chest. No one mocks him, because madness here might be the only sane reaction. And if it's his way of surviving, of organising the nonsense, then he's probably closer to salvation than the rest of us. You've started whispering to trees. They don't answer, but they don't correct you either. Which, frankly, makes them the most merciful clergy you've met so far. It ends, not with a battle, but with a bell. Not the church bell, not the alarm bell, the other one. The bell for the offering. You didn't know you had one of those. Neither did anyone else, until the bishop announced it. He said a voice had spoken to him in a dream, that the Lord had requested a gift, a soul willingly given, a holy act to break the siege, to please heaven, to shake the walls of the city and rain down divine judgment. You all nodded. Of course you did, because what else is there left to do when nothing makes sense? The first volunteer was a man no one knew well. Quiet. Clean. Always prayed the longest, even after everyone else had stopped watching. He walked to the chapel. He was blessed. He drank a cup. He fell. He did not get back up. Someone clapped. Then someone else. By nightfall, the bell rang again. The second volunteer was not a volunteer. He was chosen. They called it divine selection. A name pulled from a hat that no one saw, written in ink that no one read. A priest held it up and said, "The Lord has spoken." He screamed when they dragged him forward. Still they called it sacred. The next day, 3 more. Then 1. Then 5. Each time the bell rang, more of you accepted it without flinching, because the rhythm of horror had become comfort. And now? It wasn't even about survival. It was about staying in tune. You learned not to look too long at the chapel tent. You learned not to sit too close to the bell. You learned to fake dreams if asked. You learned to make your confessions boring, because interesting stories get you noticed, and attention gets you picked. You watched a woman pretend to faint during prayer just so they wouldn't choose her. They did anyway, said the fainting was a sign. She screamed into the fire. Not because she was afraid, but because no one else screamed with her. That's when you realised there is no fear greater than being out of sync. And the crusade runs on synchronization. A perfect choreography of delusion and dirt. One priest spends his nights writing names on stones and burying them beneath tents. He says it prevents demons from crawling into dreams. You helped him dig once. You found a dozen names you recognised. 2 were still alive. They weren't for the demons. They were a waiting list. Another night begins marking his kills by carving lines into his own leg. He's out of room now. You see him staring at his thigh during meals, whispering. He eats with blood on his fork. No one says a word, because everything's normal now. And normal means madness in a robe with a cross. Someone lights a fire near the chapel and throws in all the hymn scrolls. Says it's an offering of voices. A scribe tries to stop him. He's gagged, lashed, called a heretic. The fire burns for 3 days. No one writes anything new. From then on, sermons are improvised. Sometimes they rhyme. Sometimes they don't use words. One priest screams for an hour and collapses. The next morning he's hailed as a prophet. You stop attending services. But you still bow when others do. Because here, sincerity is irrelevant. Obedience is enough. Faith, as a concept, has long since drowned in its own rituals. Now there's only noise. Noise and maintenance. You wake up. You bless the shovel. You dig the trench. You bless the trench. You eat. You apologise for eating. You offer your blister to the Lord. You name the blister after a saint. Someone asks if you've ever heard God's voice directly. You say no. They nod. You're not ready yet. You nod too. I'll listen harder. And for a while, you stop sleeping. You stay up, staring into the fire, hoping for a voice, a whisper, a wind, anything. You hear something one night. It might be the wind. It might be your name. It might be your own thoughts clawing their way out of your skull. You don't tell anyone, because if you say it aloud, someone might call it prophecy, and you'll be next, not to die, to matter. And here mattering is fatal. One morning, you find a pile of shoes near the chapel. Not worn, not torn, just empty. Aligned, laces tied. Next to it a note. The Lord has no need for footsteps. You never find the owner, but you do hear someone recite the phrase during prayer that night. Now it's doctrine. Now shoes are discouraged. You walk barefoot through a camp littered with glass and bone, and every cut becomes a holy wound. The bishops begin marking each injury with ash. You carry 6 marks by the week's end. One day, you look at your feet and wonder if they're even yours. You try to remember how you got here. Not this spot. Not this tent. Here. In this body. This belief. This performance. But memory is soft now. Wet. Like bread left in broth. You remember your mother's face. Or someone's mother. You remember a time before salt tasted like sin. You remember laughing without checking who was watching. You remember being a person, not a cog, not a witness, not a potential martyr, just alive. And you miss it. But not enough to say anything, because speaking is a liability, and remembering is a kind of rebellion. So you forget. You forget what day it is. You forget how long the siege has lasted. You forget how long since you last slept without dreams of fire. You forget your name. Or maybe it was taken. Either way, it's not yours anymore. You wake up, or something like waking. Not quite sleep, not quite consciousness. Just the moment your eyes open and you realise the dark is still there. You're in your tent, or someone's tent. You're on a cloth, or straw, or the ground. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't feel anything. Not warmth, not cold, not fear, not relief. Just weight. Like you've become part of the earth you've been digging into for weeks. Like you're not lying on it. You're lying as it. A fellow believer pressed flat beneath the same sky that forgot how to shine. You used to flinch when you heard the morning bell. You don't anymore. It rings. You sit up. Your body moves. You go where you're told. You no longer experience change. Only continuity. No new information. No decisions. Just forward. One slow, dumb shuffle deep into the space where the person you used to be might have once lived. You don't check the sky for weather anymore. You check it for meaning. Does the cloud shape look like a cross? Does the sun rising crooked mean something? Did the stars blink oddly last night? Someone said they saw 3 crows land in a line. Someone else wept. Someone else clapped. You just nodded. Because that's the only gesture left. You haven't smiled in days. Or weeks. Not because you're sad. Because smiling is performative now. And you're tired of performing. Even tears feel like work. You've seen people fake crying during sermons. You've seen priests weep on command. You've seen men stare at fire until their eyes bled, just to feel something real enough to say, God touched me. You envy them, not because they felt God, but because they felt you don't. The hunger doesn't even register anymore. It's just background noise, a companion. Same with the lice, the stench, the cold, the rot on your toes. All just part of the orchestra now. You hear a scream nearby. You don't turn. It might be death. Might be prayer. Might be joy. You genuinely can't tell the difference anymore. You remember when you could. When agony had a tone. When songs had a beat. When words had weight. Now they all run together. A sermon sounds like a eulogy. A blessing sounds like an insult. A command sounds like God. Because the people in charge still speak with divine license. And you've stopped questioning whether they deserve it. You can't even remember the last original thought you had. You used to wonder about the world. Now you just wonder what you were supposed to say after Amen. You say your prayers. They aren't prayers. They're passwords, ritual phrases you insert into conversation to prove you're still faithful. You no longer know what faithful means. Does it mean obedience? Does it mean silence? Does it mean faking a vision so no one asks if you're doubting? You want to believe it still means hope, but you don't hope anymore. You just comply. Because hope requires vision. And all you have is instructions. Every gesture now is a kind of code. Bow slightly when someone says, the Lord walks. Kneel if they say, the Lord waits. Touch your lips if they say, the Lord listens. Cry if they say, the Lord weeps. Even if you can't, pretend. You've stopped asking yourself whether any of it is real. Because truth is irrelevant here. Function is everything. You've watched a man collapse from dehydration. The priest said he was shedding sin through suffering. You've watched a woman scream about her dead husband. The bishop said she was channeling a prophecy. You've watched children dig their own latrine pit. Someone said it taught them discipline. You said nothing. Because nothing you say will matter more than what someone else decides you meant. You used to feel shame about staying quiet. Now, silence is the last piece of yourself you can still protect, so you guard it. Because it's the only space where your thoughts can breathe, even if those thoughts are mostly static, mostly echoes, mostly get up, keep going, don't be noticed. Don't say anything strange. Don't remember who you were. Don't remember who you were. Don't remember who you were. You hear your own thoughts, and they sound like a different person. The one who walked into this crusade. The one who asked questions. The one who had a face. You can't picture that face now. You try. But the memory slides off you like mud off stone. You see faces every day, but they don't feel real anymore. Just masks. Every man with a sword has the same jaw. Every woman with a scarf has the same eyes. Every priest's mouth moves the same way. You could be talking to the same person over and over and never know it. Or maybe you are. Maybe there's only one person left, and you're all just reflections of him, flickering around the fire like broken shadows, trying to remember how to dance. You tried to pray for clarity once. You tried to ask God simply, "What do you want?" But the only answer you got was the sound of someone throwing up nearby, and then clapping. So now, you don't pray for clarity, you pray for duration. You pray to stay alive long enough to forget how much you're pretending. You pray to get through the day without anyone asking you how you're feeling, because the only honest answer is, "I don't know anymore." And honesty here is dangerous. They don't tell you what happens when you stop resisting, when your thoughts finally stop kicking, when your memory stops protesting, when your personality stops making noise in your skull like a trapped animal. They don't describe that part, because it doesn't look dramatic. It's not a scream. It's not a tear-streaked breakdown. It's not collapse in a tent or throwing your shovel to the dirt in theatrical defiance. No. It's when you're asked to shovel more waste and you say, "Of course," and don't even hear yourself say it. It's when you step in human filth barefoot and don't even flinch. It's when the priest begins his sermon for the 5th time this week with, "My dreams have been aflame again," and you already know when to nod. It's when you begin feeling lucky not to be in pain, not happy, just lucky. Like suffering is the default, and comfort is a clerical error. You start pre-apologising for things before they happen. Sorry for the way I slept. Sorry for forgetting to thank the bishop after sneezing. Sorry for needing more water. Sorry for the sound my knees made when I stood up too fast. You develop a 6th sense, what not to say, who not to look at, when to look devout, when to feign fatigue, when to shiver to look sufficiently chastised, when to hum along with the dirges even if you don't know the tune. Especially if you don't know the tune. You once heard a man get corrected mid-chant. He'd added a syllable, just one. The correction came in the form of kneeling in gravel until dawn. His knees looked like rotted fruit. He limped for days. No one asked why, because we all knew. You remember watching it happen and thinking, he should have practiced more. Not with cruelty, not with superiority. Just with understanding. Like you would if someone spilled their bowl and lost their food. A mistake, a rule, a price. And you realise that's it. That's the shift. You no longer ask if things are right. You just ask what the cost is, what the going rate is for being too loud, too curious, too fast, too honest. Because everything has a price here. And the currency is your inner self. The less of it you spend, the longer you last. That's why you stop making jokes. Not because they're forbidden, though they are, but because you can't remember how. Humour requires context, a shared sense of absurdity. But here, absurdity is sacred. You can't joke about the bishop calling the city walls sinful architecture. You can't joke about the knight who thinks bees are angels. You can't joke about the fact that everyone clapped when a dog barked during Mass and called it confirmation, because they're serious. Because somewhere in the endless mud and blood and rotting tents, people started confusing delusion for discipline. And worse, you started playing along, not even out of fear anymore, out of exhaustion. Because pretending is easier than confronting the screaming silence behind your eyes. You used to imagine escape. Not anymore. Escape is too complicated. It would require you to know where you are, who you are, what you want, where you'd go. You don't have those answers. You barely have questions. You used to whisper to yourself before sleep. Now you just lie still, mouth closed, trying to mimic death. Because death is stillness. Stillness is holiness. Holiness is compliance. You saw a man sleep with his hands crossed over his chest like a corpse. You started doing the same. It's easier. And in the morning when someone dies, you help carry the body, wash the feet, mutter the blessing, wipe the blood, and forget who it was by nightfall. Not as a coping mechanism. As a practical necessity, your mind has limits. Grief takes space, and you can't afford space. You live in a trench of obedience, and emotions don't fit here. They're too loud. They mark you. You saw a woman cry once. Not during service, not during punishment. Just alone, quietly, near the relics. The next day she was asked to demonstrate spiritual resilience by sleeping on stone. For a week, no blanket, no food, just hymns. She emerged silent. Now she smiles constantly. You're not sure which version of her is more terrifying. You've learned to keep your face still. Not hard, not soft, not blank, just neutral. Like you're always listening for God, even if you stopped listening weeks ago. You can't remember the last time you meant the word amen, but you say it anyway because it fits. It fills the space where doubt used to be. You're not haunted by questions anymore. You're haunted by nothing. No resistance, no heat, no hunger, no noise, just the hum of habit. You clean what's in front of you. You bless what they hand you. You speak when spoken to. You kneel when the others kneel. You laugh when someone laughs, just in case. Even if you didn't hear the joke. Even if there was no joke. Because laughter now is less about joy than it is about recognition. Proof that you're still tuned to the group frequency, still vibrating with the herd. You don't know how many days have passed. No one does. There's a man who marks time by carving on his thigh. He stopped after the 100th mark. Not because he ran out of room. He just stopped caring. He says it's all one day now. You believe him. You don't remember the beginning. You've stopped imagining the end. You're in the middle. And the middle never moves. It just deepens. You're not surviving the crusade. You're the soil it grows in. The vessel it pours through. The shadow it drags forward. The echo it leaves behind. And you're okay with that. Not because it's right. Not because it's holy. Not because it's even real. But because it's easier than being a person again. You forget how to pace your steps. Not in the literal sense. You still walk. You still move. You still function. But you no longer walk like a person. Your gait isn't shaped by rhythm or need or terrain. It's shaped by the person in front of you. And the one in front of them. And the one in front of them. And so on, in a long, exhausted line of people who have all forgotten who set the original pace. Sometimes you think it might have been God. Other times you think it might have just been the first man to wake up. You used to resent the monotony. Now you need it. Now it's the only thing holding you together. Routine becomes spine, ritual becomes muscle memory, Absence becomes grace. You live by rules you no longer remember learning. You wake. You eat if allowed. You clean what's handed to you. You avoid the wrong eyes. You repeat the right words. You sleep, not when tired, but when permitted. You stopped measuring time in hours. Now it's measured in bells. The bell for prayer, the bell for penance, the bell for gathering, the bell for punishment, the bell for the dead. You know them by tone. You know them by echo. You know them like scars. And when they don't ring on time, something inside you flickers. Not fear, not anger, just dissonance. A chime-shaped void where certainty used to live. Because nothing is worse than unpredictability. A man once called it the taste of hell. You understand now. Hell isn't fire, it's disruption. And you've become so attuned to order that even mercy feels violent. You remember when a stranger tried to share extra bread with you? A miracle, right? Kindness? No. You panicked. You looked around first, scanned for witnesses, evaluated the risk, then refused. Because bread here is never just bread. It's a symbol, a potential accusation, a test, a violation of fast. You couldn't take the risk. You watched the man walk away, still holding the bread, his eyes soft, his posture confused. You never saw him again. You didn't ask where he went. You don't ask about people anymore. Because if they're gone, they're gone. And if they're not, then you're next. You've stopped dreaming. At least you think you have. Sometimes you wake up with a vague memory of colour, or warmth, or voices not shaped like chants. You tell yourself it was nothing. Because dreams are dangerous. You've seen people wake up crying. They're watched for days. Sometimes questioned. Sometimes exiled. Sometimes used as test cases for new forms of purification. One woman said she dreamed of a bright city made of glass and wind. She smiled when she told people. By nightfall, she was assigned wind prayer, a punishment where she had to hum constantly while walking the perimeter of the camp, supposedly to consecrate the breeze. She lasted 3 days before collapsing. They left her there, said she had returned to God through air. You remember her name? Or maybe you don't. Maybe you just remember the song she hummed. You hum it sometimes too. Quietly, in rhythm with your digging, with your eating, with the sound of your own emptiness. Not to remember her, just to not feel alone. Because that's the irony. You're surrounded by people, completely alone. Every eye you meet is scared. Every hand you shake is trembling. Every voice you hear is echoing someone else. No one speaks like themselves anymore. They speak like versions of someone holier, someone purer, someone more committed. The woman who used to curse when she dropped her spoon now says, "Blessed be my clumsiness." The boy who once sang lullabies now only hums hymn fragments. The man who used to laugh like a thunderclap now chuckles like he's asking permission. Even your own voice has changed. You didn't notice when it happened. But you caught it once. A prayer muttered back to yourself. And it didn't sound like you. Not your cadence. Not your tone. Not your soul. You've become fluent in performance. You kneel with posture. You repent with precision. You clasp your hands in the officially sanctioned pattern. Right over left, fingers bowed, not crossed, never crossed. You once crossed your fingers out of old habit. A priest saw it, just 1 second. He said nothing. But 3 hours later, you were assigned silence. For 7 days, you didn't speak. No questions, no prayers, no dreams. By day 4, you forgot what your voice sounded like. By day 7, you forgot you were waiting. You didn't notice when the silence ended. Because nothing changed. No one asked you to speak. So you didn't. and that became your new default. You exist now like a shadow, responsive, present, non-intrusive. People ask if you're well. You say, I am preserved. People ask what you think. You say, I reflect the will. People ask what you feel. You say, I feel correction. And they nod. And they leave you alone. And that, more than anything, feels like a blessing. Because solitude is the last thing that doesn't require permission. No one polices your thoughts because you don't have any dangerous ones left. Just fragments. I should kneel. I should wait. I should not speak until spoken to. I should say amen. Not out of belief. Not out of fear. Out of habituation. You don't hate the crusade. You don't love it either. You've simply been filed into it. Absorbed. Integrated. You're no longer separate from it. You are it. And when the next bell rings, whatever it's for, you'll rise. Not out of faith. Not out of obligation. But because rising is what you do, and the thought of not rising, you wouldn't even know where to start. There is no funeral for you. No procession. No chant. No moment of silence. Because you don't die. You fade. Not all at once. Not in any visible way. But piece by piece. Like a fire slowly starving for air. One day someone asks your name. You blink. Not because you don't remember, but because it no longer feels like a question that matters. You say the name quietly. But it comes out wrong. It sounds foreign in your own mouth. Like you're reciting a word from an old book. Something sacred, but not yours. You say it again, slower, softer, still wrong. You realise your name didn't die. It just slipped out of context. Like an artifact with no culture left to explain it. You don't correct them. The person who asks nods, says, "Blessed be," and walks on. You think that might be the last time anyone says your name out loud. And strangely, that feels like peace, because you're not pretending anymore. There's nothing to protect, nothing to present. You are completely absorbed. You once imagined the end would come with noise, fire, screams, a divine revelation, a moment of clarity. But instead, it's quiet. No rage, no flashbacks, no defiant stand against injustice. Just a soft surrender to the momentum of the machine, like a feather caught in the tide. You walk without thinking. You kneel without purpose. You eat when fed. You repeat when spoken to. You no longer wonder if something is wrong. Because wondering requires contrast, and you've forgotten what not this even felt like. There was a time when you would have described this as hollow. Now it just feels efficient. You sleep like a tool sheathed in its drawer. You speak like parchment reads itself. You breathe like the camp breathes. Slow, shallow, synchronized. Someone dies beside you. You don't flinch. Someone confesses beside you. You don't listen. Someone says they saw a vision of the Virgin Mary in the smoke above the latrine. You nod. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? Every moment is equally meaningless, which means every moment is equally holy. That's the new logic. And it works. There's even a comfort to it. Not joy. Never joy. But a kind of gentle numbness. A velvet fog in the skull. Not enough to confuse. Just enough to dull. You still smile when others smile. But it's not mimicry anymore. It's instinct. You've internalized the choreography, the ups and downs, the silence and song, the grief and glory. You used to think it was acting. Now it's breathing. There's a priest who walks in circles now, reciting phrases that aren't from any scripture. No one corrects him. He's not rebuked. He's canonized. He's given a title, the one who spins. You nod respectfully when he passes. Sometimes you follow him, not because you believe, just because it feels right to move. There's a boy who digs a hole every day and fills it every night. He says he's making room for grace. You helped him once. He never thanked you. You didn't need thanks. You just needed something to do with your hands. There's a woman who hasn't spoken in over a month. No one notices. She attends every service, bows at every line, cries at all the correct moments. What is there to say anyway? The words have all been said before. Said better, said louder, said by people who were burned or buried for saying them. Now silence is safer. Now silence is holier. You haven't spoken in 3 days yourself. No one's commented. You realise no one needs you to speak anymore. They just need you to function. You carry wood. You boil water. You repeat psalms. You stack bodies. You are useful. And usefulness is all that's left of your humanity. There's no final thought, no mental farewell, no inner monologue whispering goodbye to the old you. Just stillness. Not even peace, just absence. The crusade no longer feels like a place you're in. It feels like what you are. Not a traveller, not a believer, not a soul, not even a body. Just a ritual wearing your skin. Just a task carrying itself out. You're a living parchment. A hymn with legs. A forgotten promise moving through mud and memory and sacred repetition. And when the bell rings again, for prayer, or punishment, or purification, or just because someone needed to ring it, you stand. Not out of duty, not out of choice, not out of fear, not out of anything. You're just a stand. Because you always do. Because the crusade doesn't end. It forgets. And now, it's forgotten you. And so, you lie there. The sky doesn't care. The dirt doesn't ask. The crusade continues. Not because of faith, not because of victory, but because no one remembers how to stop. Someone sings nearby. You don't recognise the melody. You don't try to. A breeze moves through the camp. The tents ripple. A flag falls. No one picks it up. The sun rises like it's apologising for showing up again. But you don't look. Your eyes are half closed. Your thoughts are half gone. And the world, this tired, splintered, devout, delirious world, keeps breathing. Just barely. And if you're still awake, don't worry. Sleep will come. Not gently, not kindly, but eventually, like everything else here.